The fireplace burned brightly in the room, the bed creaked, the sheet barely hid the man's muscular body. The girl trembled, sometimes moaning, and then covered her face with her palm, but the man asked her not to hide. He looked down at her with authority and interest, straightening his short blonde hair. From the back, the young man looked like a pile of muscles, with glare of flame playing on his back and shoulders. It was a quiet night outside the window. The stars were almost invisible behind the clouds. A fair-haired man stood in a robe in front of the window and looked at the bed. The blue-eyed girl turned over in bed and rubbed her sleepy face a little. The man was glad that he waited for her to wake up, because now he wants to hear the answer to his question. The girl was lost in memories as she realized that she had been too lucky lately. The villagers were filled with energy when they heard that the lord of the province would be visiting them. Like yesterday, the heroine again had a lot of work to do, for example, to look into the trading store. It seems that if she works hard, she can have a good life. So she was glad to move to this place where it is cold all year round. Suddenly, in the crowd, she saw Aunt Gelda with 3 children, whom she immediately recognized as Finn and Luca, and the children greeted their mother. This day was supposed to be just one of many, when suddenly the people in the square began to run. A commotion began. One of the residents dropped firewood. The girl saw a horse that was already too close. Suddenly, the animal went berserk and reared up right above the small children. Aunt Gelda was carried away by the crowd in the other direction, so that the mother had to cover them with herself. It seems that this was the moment when everything went wrong. A man in armor suddenly appeared near the girl, stabbing the horse with a sword. He was a tall, fair-haired young man. His face looked aristocratic even when stained with blood. The girl bowed to thank him for saving him, and also said that she would repay his kindness. The man grinned. He did not consider the death of his beloved horse to be kindness, so he ordered the stranger to bring the children's father so that he would pay for the horse. The girl replied that she did not have a husband, so she would repay herself later, but the Lord believed that a woman could not do this. However, when the girl seriously said that she was ready for anything, one thought occurred to the young man. He invited her to come to Volador Castle that night. When the girl with the children and her aunt were at home, a quarrel broke out between them. The dark-haired woman cried and tried to persuade the girl not to go, but she was adamant. The heroine was on her way to Geneva, that is, on the border of the Ringan Empire, so she had to get there in a carriage. Her path lay in the castle of the Marquis of Morinheights, the grandson of the brave Red Lion who was the founding hero of the Ringan Empire. The descendant of this great man is called the Rebirth of the Lion for his military merits. The butler reported to the lord that the widow was ready, bowed and left. So, in front of the marquis stood a slender girl with long curly locks. Her blue eyes were emotionless. However, her body was trembling, but the widow cited the cold, so the lord covered her with a fur coat from his shoulder. The Marquis Morinheights himself stood in a half-closed robe, the deep neckline opening up a view of a strong torso. He was surprised by the courage of the guest. She was ready to jump under a horse and promised to do anything for him. The great motherly love is truly amazing. The girl confidently answered that she would give such a promise to anyone, regardless of origin. The lord looked at her intently. He was a little hurt by the word to anyone. For some time they stood silently opposite each other, scorching their interlocutor with a cold gaze. The silence was interrupted by a man. He reminded that the guest should know what to do when she entered the man's room in such an outfit. He even suggested that she leave if she was afraid, but the girl resolutely took off her fur coat, and then the couple moved onto the bed. So the Marquis of Morinheights again stands in front of the widow in a dressing gown, waiting for her to awaken. He is concerned with the question of how he ended up being the first man with whom the girl spent the night. The lord came closer and ran his finger over the widow's lips, and then asked if he really needed to take her again to get an answer. After that, the young man wrapped his large palm around the girl's thin neck. He pressed more and more, when suddenly she asked him to stop and pushed him in the chest. The guest covered herself with a sheet, breathed heavily, and assured the Marquis that she was not lying. Morinheights drew his own conclusions, but they were wrong. The girl squeezed the sheet and said that the children were not born to her, but she still considers them her children, so the lord should have moved away and gotten off her. The Marquis walked away from the bed, scratched the back of his head, and asked who, then, was the real mother of those children. The girl explained that her brother's wife was their mother. She died barely giving birth to Rudia, their youngest. The brother sailed on the merchant ship Puisin before the birth of his youngest child. Since then, it has not been possible to contact him. There is not even information about whether he is alive at all. The eldest boy is barely 5 years old, and the second is only 3, and they are too young to understand the death of their parents because they believe that the heroine is their mother. The lord was surprised that his guest pretended to be a widow, despite the fact that she herself was still innocent. He looked at his guest and thought that she would have to work because she didn't even know if her brother was alive, so it was easier to pretend to be a widow than an unmarried girl. In any case, the Marquis heard everything he wanted, so it was time to get back to business, and he again clung to the fragile body of his guest. He bent over the girl, putting his arm around her shoulders and neck. And then he began to bite the soft skin, reminding in a whisper that Bolt Morenheitz himself had taken it. Morning came. The sun illuminated the bed in which the long-haired girl lay. The Marquis was dressing, and the guest was looking at the wall and waiting for him to leave. However, when he addressed her by name, Claire, she stood up, apologized for disturbing her master's rest, and asked permission to leave right away. He did not look her way when he said that the guest and her family should remain at Castle Volador until the snows melted on Mount Altus next year. The Marquis decided that this was the price the girl had to pay. The heroine's heart sank with the realization that this would not end in one night. Morenheitz left the room and reasoned that paying with his body for the death of his beloved horse was quite fair for Geneva. He was also captivated by the rebellion that Claire so carefully hides under the guise of submission. He experienced such pleasure only on the battlefield, so he could not believe that he felt this in the bed of a simple widow. It was even absurd. It was beautiful sunny weather outside. Finn and Luca were playing and having fun. At this time, Aunt Gelda was busy with housework and was angry with Claire. The girl decided that it was time to remove the heating pad from her stomach, but her aunt immediately stopped this attempt. The woman was very worried about Claire because there was such a huge bear with her at night, and the girl herself looked calm and even believed that living in the castle would be better than here. Besides, she doesn't even remember her mother's voice, so it's only thanks to her aunt that she knows how to be a good mother. Gelda was touched, but the next vulgar phrase from Claire irritated her again, and in the meantime there was a knock on the door. The girl stood up to open the door and was very surprised when she saw the General of the Knightly Order of Tavitan, Julian Crom, as a guest. By order of the Marquis of Morenheitz, he arrived to escort Lady Claire to the castle, and whispers immediately began in the crowd. So the girl was riding in a carriage and looking out the window emotionlessly. She was just trying to convince herself that everything would be fine. The children were happy to go on a trip and move in general, but Aunt Gelda cursed and asked not to run. Claire squinted, looking up at the majestic castle, bathed in sunlight. At this time, the Marquis was sitting in his office with documents and a special guest. Schwijven put his hand on his heart and greeted his master sternly. He came because he heard that the Marquis had brought a woman to the heir's tower. Schwijven reminded the master that after the death of his mother, Lady Oberta, this place had no owner. Maybe in this case, it would be better to find someone for this position first. But the Marquis explained that few women could meet the requirements of the Count, and besides, the Emperor works day and night to get an heir. But Schwijven was sure that he was not the only one who wanted the master to become the ruler of this empire. About 20 years ago, when the first emperor died, the political arena was divided into 3 factions. The capital is Halpen, where Emperor Kilveric resides, and the Duchy of Puisin is ruled by his brother Archduke Edwin, as well as the Marquisate of Geneva, ruled by Ringen's friend Neuberg Morenheitz. According to Schwijven, the current emperor and archduke are not capable of ruling the empire. They even sent away their younger sister because they felt she was a threat. In the princess's absence, the only heirs to Ringen's blood are the emperor, the archduke, and the archduke's only daughter, Lady Brody. Apparently, the empire is on the verge of collapse, so you can no longer rely on Kilveric and Edwin. Count Schwijven wanted to continue his fiery speech, but the Marquis stopped him. The guest apologized, explaining that there was very little time left before the Lord left for Puisin, so he, like a faithful servant, showed impatience. In any case, we should not forget that the Archduke will definitely try to arrange an engagement for the Marquis with Lady Brody this time, but when Morenheitz saw the chariot arriving with the widow, he immediately sent the Count away. The family was located in a spacious new house. Claire was happy and jokingly said that the children would no longer catch a cold. The General of the Knightly Order explained that the girl's family would live here and the lady herself would go to the tower. He also reported that the Marquis was already waiting, which shocked his aunt, but Claire calmed her down. She also instructed Finn and Luke to wash up and go to bed before their mother returned. And if someone goes to bed late, they have to eat 2 bowls of spinach soup. Claire was a little upset because the tower was quite far from the annex. Sneaking out would be more difficult than she thought. The door opened with a creak and the girl entered a large dark room. Here the Marquis was already waiting for her. He stood silently in his fur coat. There was a sword nearby, so the atmosphere around the Lord was still frightening. There are certainly rumors surrounding Morenheitz, with many people calling him the best swordsman in the Empire. However, for a man who became famous in battles, he is quite handsome, although he also has a creepy side. He came closer to the girl, and she thanked him for the new home, and the Marquis grabbed her hand, put his arm around her waist, and looked straight into her eyes. Claire once again said thank you for the safety that the master gave her, because he sent the Teutonic Order of Knights after her, warning everyone not to touch her. And thanks to the Marquis, she and the children can now be in the safest place in Geneva. This caused a grin on Mohrenheitz's face, and he knocked the girl onto the bed. Now Claire's debt has become larger, so she will have to work hard to pay it back. But the girl was embarrassed and blushed. He ran his hand along her thigh and leaned his face against the soft skin, awaiting the well-deserved payment. Morning came, and Claire enjoyed the softness of the bed through her sleep. Suddenly, the same thought scared her. She jumped up and realized how much her body hurt. On the other hand, this is not surprising. The Marquis continued yesterday until she lost consciousness. There was a knock on the door, and a dark-haired young man named Jake entered the room. He is the butler of Volador Castle. As long as Claire remains in the tower, she can turn to him if she needs anything. The girl asked if her work began today, for example. She could start sewing and tanning leather immediately without training. She also intends to work hard on any assignment, however. She is useless in the kitchen, so she will be grateful if she is assigned to do the laundry. The butler explained to the guest that while she was serving the master, no one would allow her to do such rough work. Claire grinned at this phrase. What he had been doing to her for the last 2 days could hardly be called serving the master. Jake also said that the lady could go for a walk, but she was not allowed to invite anyone into the tower. The girl was surprised by this attitude, so she decided to behave like a hostess, sending the butler away to rest. The door clicked, the servant disappeared, and Claire collapsed on the bed, sighing heavily. It had been too long since she had had her own bed. On the other hand, she seems to have earned this luxury for putting up with such a rude man. It's a fair deal, although she still feels awkward. Claire remembered her brother and how he called her cold-blooded. It seemed to be true. In any case, since such a happy opportunity has arisen, you need to take full advantage of it and get a good night's sleep, and then spend time with the children. Jake walked out of the tower onto the street and was surprised by the behavior of the Marquis, because yesterday he went to the village on business with supplies and returned covered in blood. The Knights of the Order then spoke with admiration about the beautiful widow who boldly threw herself under the horse. Red-haired Max still wouldn't stop talking and irritated the Marquis with empty chatter. So the Lord ordered his friend to shut up and bring him that woman. The knight at first didn't even understand what he was talking about, while Bolt ordered that upon the guest's arrival, Jake would escort her to the Marquis's room. As a result, Bolt not only brought the woman to the castle, but also settled her in the heir's tower. And there is also something extraordinary about this woman. Despite the situation, she is too calm, and although a commoner, she is surprisingly elegant. Jake even thought that it was time for a change in the life of the Marquis, but from that day on, he never visited the tower, and at that time Claire was asking for work in the castle. She explained that it seemed that the gentleman had forgotten about her anyway, and she needed to repay the debt to the Marquis because she had not done anything for 10 days. Claire explained that in bed she was paying for the lives of her children, and since he no longer visited her, it was time to pay in another way. The people of Geneva believe that all debts must be paid. Now the Marquis is helping her family and can kick them out before the family arrives. Jake tried to persuade the girl to stop until he was stopped by Max. He made jokes again, while Mr. Bolt himself sat on horseback next to him. A gloomy and serious gentleman sat on a horse, not paying attention to those around him. Jake asked the Marquis why they were wearing armor, but he received an answer from Max, who explained that the guards had spotted a bear on the mountain. Claire looked at the blonde man's profile and realized that he was deliberately ignoring her. Max continued to laugh and asked Jake what kind of woman was with him, but Bolt immediately kicked the horse on his sides and rushed forward. Claire ran after him, screaming and begging him to stop because she needed to say something. Jake grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her towards him so that she wouldn't get run over by the horse, and Max noticed that the situation was painfully familiar. And then he remembered that this was the same widow, except that now she looked much neater. Mohrenheitz turned to the girl and, looking down at her with contempt, ordered her to go back to the tower. The girl replied that she would return only if she was allowed to work in the castle. The Marquis once again coldly ordered her to return, and Claire continued to argue. Then the Lord turned to the butler and ordered him to teach the ignorant woman what would happen if orders were disobeyed. And if Bolt ever sees the widow out of place again, Jake will lose his arm. After that, the Marquis rushed forward, and Max went to catch up with him. Jake was not too scared, but Claire felt hatred for this bastard. Later, the girl was already rocking Rudia at the tea table, and the aunt was interested in the handsome butler and permission to work. Unfortunately, Jake cannot do anything without the Marquis, and songs of praise in honor of the Lord turned out to be empty. Gelda was merciless in her hatred of the nobles, so Claire had to be reminded that the children were nearby. The aunt did not stop and warned what disobedience to the Marquis could lead to. Claire was in good spirits and joked about stocking up on a couple of silver plates so she could sell them if something happened. Gelda continued to swear, and the girl again asked her to calm down for Rudia's sake. Meanwhile, on the mountain there was a battle with the thickest-skinned bear. He didn't care about the sword. They tried to strangle him with ropes, when suddenly more angry bears appeared nearby. At this moment, Mr. Marquis Morenheitz arrived on the scene. With a slight movement of his hand, he dealt with the terrible animals. Now he needs to call a lot of people to transport the carcasses before sunset. Covered in blood, Bolt exhaled heavily, put away his sword, and asked Max to sort everything out here. Lately, the gentleman has been disappearing after every hunt. Perhaps the fact is that the blood got on the famous sword Ascaron. The Marquis's horse grazed peacefully near his clothes. Morenheitz himself stood knee-deep in the river. It seems that here he could really rest, washing his face with cold, clean water. Perhaps he is better suited to remain on the frontier, on the battlefield, than to follow in his father's footsteps and rule. The thirst for blood is eternal. At this rate, Bolt feels that he will simply go crazy. And to quench your thirst, you need to take part in a battle on the battlefield, or in some other place. The Marquis suddenly remembered how Jake grabbed Claire's hand when she tried to run after the horse. The Lord grinned at the thought of Claire. She had only been alone for a couple of days, and was already showing how much she missed a man in her bed. Well, since she so desperately wants to be in bed with the Marquis again, he will visit her one more time, in any case. It costs him nothing to hug a woman who means nothing to him. While the boys were playing in the yard, Rudia had lunch, with which Claire was helped by Aunt Gelda. The girl just now has the opportunity to relieve the eternally tired woman, and besides, the servants allowed her to join in milking the cows this morning. Gelda replied that such an opportunity arose only thanks to the details about the lady's life. The peasants' questions ranged from the death of a husband to gaining and losing the favor of a marquis. Despite the bad language, Claire was glad that there were people here who were kind to Finn and Luca, and they could play with children their own age. The aunt indignantly asked why the girl disappeared immediately after leaving for the tower if she cared so much about the children. Moreover, Gelda was interested in how her niece spent her days there. Claire thought about it and replied that she does practically nothing, just wipes dust everywhere, lights the fireplaces every day on all floors, ventilates the room and shakes out the blankets. Now she is exploring the floors, so she managed to come across a huge library. Auntie was immediately indignant because it turned out that Claire had actually been busy all this time. Today the girl plans to climb to the very top of the tower, and Gelda was only glad in her thoughts that her niece was really doing well. So the aunt was distracted by thoughts of the poor girl, who had to grow up quickly and live in the usual hardships. In any case, Gelda understood that Claire would remain a baby for her. The time was approaching sunset, and the girl said goodbye to her hospitable aunt, heading back to the tower. Gelda tried to persuade her to stay because the Marquis never returned after that day. But Claire did not want to give him reasons to reproach him. Besides, he saw her today, so perhaps this meeting will remind him to visit his guest tonight. Claire walked to the tower and thought about her position, because of which the people of the castle do not talk to her. A woman who serves her master. A woman who gave her body to a man with power. But she does not care about these gossip. Claire and her family will leave this place with the beginning of spring in any case. You just need to endure until this time. These are the thoughts the girl's head was busy with until she saw something beautiful. The orange sun smoothly disappears into the snow-capped mountains. I wonder what this beauty looks like from the top of the tower. This question made the girl run faster up the stairs. For some reason it reminds her of a moment from a book she loved when she was young. How a man with golden white hair and a red-haired girl met under the same sunset sky. As she climbed the stairs, she recalled her favorite moment in the book. The sky over the whole world turned red, and when the golden disk disappeared over the horizon, the two lovers swore that even death would not separate them. Claire was surprised to find the Marquis himself on the roof of the tower. Had he really come to admire the sunset? He calmly turned his gaze to her, while Claire's threat to cut off Jake's hand was running through her head. Bolt was the first to start the conversation, noting that the widow was quite fast, and she bowed, saying that she did not expect to find the master there. The Marquis made another caustic remark, as Claire looked at his dazzling beauty against the red sky, such that he wanted to look away. At the same time, he is incredibly arrogant even now, when he talks about not walking around the castle unnecessarily. This man was the cause of all Claire's misfortunes, and she was forced to make excuses to him again, reminding him that she only wanted to pay off the debt. And if the Marquis no longer wanted her, then she could do it in another way. Then the Lord addressed the widow by name and said that she should just wait. She looked at him with piercing blue eyes and asked how long he could wait. After all, he simply imprisoned her, made a laughing stock of her family, and did not give any guarantees. But the Marquis was cold and adamant. The girl is only required to wait until he desires her, and then Claire asked what she should do if she herself desired him. Not wanting to become a woman who could simply be taken advantage of, she put on an innocent face and repeated her question, which had so surprised the Lord. Bolt stood silently for some time, his mouth slightly open in amazement. Then he pulled himself together, grinned, and asked if Claire really needed a man to warm her bed. And why is it that the wood burning in the fireplace is no longer enough for heating? The girl persistently said that it was not the cold, but the fact that she had nothing to do, and there were 4 people in her family whom she had to support. For herself, Claire understood that the Marquis was sheltering them only until next year. She needed to prepare for life after she had to leave this place, and rest in this case was an unaffordable luxury. Therefore, she asks the Lord to show mercy and allow her and her aunt to work at the castle. In addition, the girl needs to prepare for the day when the Marquis will seek meetings with her so that she and the children can live independently. The word itself greatly surprised the Lord, and the girl reminded him that she would be left penniless when she left the castle. Morenheitz grinned. Is it really possible that if he does not visit the widow every night, she must be kept busy with work? Claire replied that even if he visited her, she still really needed work. At that moment, the Lord pulled the embarrassed lady to him in one motion, hugging her around the waist, and looked deep into her eyes. He touched the warm skin on her shoulder with his lips and asked if it wasn't easier to get what you wanted by pleasing him than by working. Bolt kissed Claire's neck, but she asked him to stop, and then completely pushed him away. He licked his lips and asked if her mother really didn't tell her what to do if she wanted to get something from a man. She turned away and replied that she had not heard such a thing from her mother since she left the world immediately after the birth of her daughter. The Marquis then noted for himself that this girl not only takes care of the 3 children of her brother and aunt, but also grew up without knowing the face of her own mother. He ran his finger over Claire's wet lips and said that if she wanted something, she just needed to call him to her bed, and then he pressed his lips to hers. In the dark room, the creaking of a wooden bed and women's moans were heard. Claire had tears in her eyes, and in a broken voice she asked the Lord to slow down. He grabbed her wrist tightly and reminded her that there had been other words and requests before. Bolt frowned, pulled the girl's thigh closer, and the room was filled with new moans, and the Marquis's back was filled with new scratches. Later, as Claire adjusted her breathing, Morenheiters thought that this woman smelled of the wind blowing from the mountains of Altus, and this refreshing aroma replaced the smell of blood. He knew that the widow had not run to the top to see him, but nevertheless, the Lord did not feel disappointed. Bolt wanted to punish her for ignoring the warning to stay in one place, but her presence was enough to tame the irritation. The first night spent with her was not so bad, and when he went to bed alone afterwards, the Marquis was surprised by the feeling of a slight trembling. Despite this, he did not return to her, perhaps because he did not understand the reason why he gave her this tower in just one night. But it seems as if this woman does not know her situation. She is worried about her future even after spending the night with the Marquis. Even if he did not visit her anymore, she would be compensated accordingly. It is not clear whether this is naivety regarding the world order or whether she is trying to deceive the Lord. Bolt looked again at Claire's red, wet face and tucked her hair behind her ear. He didn't have any feelings even for noble people. Why then would he want to keep this rootless one close to him? Claire clearly continued to bother him, and to distract himself from strange thoughts, he kissed the girl again. Morning came, and while the sun played with Claire's curls scattered on the bed, Bolt buttoned his shirt. At the exit of the room, the butler was already waiting for him with morning greetings. He came to escort the Lord to the office, and while Bolt walked along the corridors of the tower, he noted to himself that Claire seemed to have touched every corner here. The Marquis's last memories of this tower were filled with the smell of blood, and now everything has changed. These words scared Jake. Is it really time to ban the lady from cleaning here? Bolt calmly replied that it was her choice and that it was time to give the woman's aunt some work. The Marquis was completely calm and noted that the night had gone well, so it was possible to make some concessions. Jake was surprised by the Lord's behavior because he never listened to any request, no matter how hard he was begged. Is it really possible that this time the Marquis really is changing? There were various jewelry with precious stones on the table in front of the Marquis, but Bolt did not want to look at them. Jake would have been glad not to bother the Lord. But unfortunately, he could not do this. The lord had to choose a gift for the Archduke. The butler decided to help the gentleman with the choice, showing off a beautiful shining bracelet. A rather extraordinary thing, the Archduke would like it. Bolt didn't care at all, so regardless of the jewel he agreed, but he also had to choose a gift for Lady Brodie. Without looking up from reading the book, the Marquis suggested simply choosing a horse. Jake was embarrassed and asked if Lady Brodie really needed a horse, and Bolt confirmed his words, only the animal must be obedient and playful. The butler was amazed that the gentleman was going to send a horse instead of jewelry to the only princess of the empire. However, Bolt also ordered that all the other jewelry be packed and donated as well, as long as he would not see them again. But then the Marquis's gaze fell on a beautiful necklace with blue crystals, which he asked to leave on the table. Jake wondered if he had heard it wrong, because the lord only glanced at the decoration. All this seemed strange to the butler ever since the master ordered that girl's family to find work. Something unusual has been happening to the Marquis lately. Jake looked out the window and wondered if this necklace might have something to do with the lady in that tower. Meanwhile, on the other side of the window, the guest of the tower herself, with a candle in her hands, was climbing the stairs. She wondered how quickly a job had been found for her aunt, whether this was due to her conviction, or whether the Marquis had originally planned everything this way. On the other hand, Claire herself still hasn't been given the opportunity to do anything, but the Lord recognized her being here as useful, and that's a good thing. The Marquis doesn't seem to be going to take back his words either, so you can take a break. The girl entered the library on the 3rd floor, comfortably flooded with candlelight. She put the lamp on the table and chose a book. After airing began, the pages no longer smelled damp. Claire decided to spend the rest of the evening reading a history book. The founder of the Ringen Empire was Nicholas Ringen. Together with his friend Newburk, he won many victories on the battlefield and accomplished many great deeds. He united the continent of Western Roman into a single empire, and then fell in love with a mysterious woman and made her his empress. He was a favorite of the people of the empire until the very last day of his life. At this time, Bolt Morenheitz and Julian Crom, dressed in armor, walked through the forest. The Marquis stopped and looked up at the window in the tower, in which the light was burning, and the knight was surprised that the gentleman was looking there again. Bolt grinned and noted the excessive observation of the general of the knightly order. Julian explained that it was his duty, and besides, he wanted to accompany the gentleman to Puisin. The general had his own scores to settle with a man whom he wanted to tear into pieces, and this same man lives in health in the castle of Langtao, just in Puissen. But the lord reminded that the same can be agreed with the Archduke. Those knights who followed Ringen the Great were knights of the Teutonic Order. Every member of this order despises the current emperor and Archduke. Julian was amazed that the Marquis had come up with such an idea. The Marquis explained that the parade was now dangerous, but not as dangerous as the fact that knights appeared there who wanted to devour the Archduke alive. The general said that there were rumors that the lord was carrying all kinds of jewelry to propose at Puisin. Julian, of course, considers the Marquis a wise man, but still the Archduke is a vile and cunning man. This wily man will do whatever it takes to get his daughter into Morenheitz Pastel. But the Marquis once again coldly addressed the general by name so that he would stop. This engagement will never happen, so there is no point in pestering the lord on this topic. The men had been standing near the tower door for some time, so Bolt jokingly asked if Julian was going to come with him. Of course, this was not necessary, so the general took his leave, and then thought that the Marquis was not the kind of person to fall for the Archduke's tricks. But the gentleman had never shown interest in women even on the battlefield, and now he became interested in the girl in that tower. Is it a good idea to be intimate with this girl before going to Puisin, or will it just add more wood to the fire of his desires? The Marquis climbed to the 3rd floor of the tower and looked through the crack of the slightly open library door. Bolt thought that the widow came here out of curiosity, but it seems that she can actually read, which is unexpected. The lord quietly entered the room. The recent words of the girl spoken at the top of the tower were spinning in his head. It seems that then he realized what emotions he really felt for Claire. When he saw her, he felt dissatisfied, because he is the most revered person in this empire. But when he is with her, he feels that he is interfering with someone noble and respectable. The Marquis felt as if he had become a beggar or a drunkard. This thought made him grin. He was like a scumbag who was drunk but could not stop drinking strong alcohol. He took the girl by the hand and turned her around to press his face to hers, and then coldly ordered her to undress. But Claire tried to push him away, and the lord was turned on by her purity and nobility. He bit her finger. Looking into her embarrassed face and crystal blue eyes, Bolt wondered why he felt guilty before. The lord's gaze expressed lust mixed with tenderness. He said that such a disheveled look suits Claire very well. Her eyes looked like gems. I wonder what she would look like if she wore that necklace on her thin, fair skin and stood in the blue spring water. His imagination painted beautiful pictures. The Marquis even felt annoyed because he already felt satisfaction. Morenheitz quickly got rid of his armor and was left half naked, the bookshelves shaking from his pressure. The girl loudly asked him to stop, but the man was too carried away by her breasts. At some point, books from the shelf simply began to rain down. Bolt picked the girl up in his arms, and she only asked him to stop because books were falling all around. Tears flowed from Claire's eyes. She was in pain, but the Marquis was not going to stop, so he cupped the girl's face with his palm and kissed her passionately on the lips. This action ended with the arrival of the butler. He was surprised why the gentleman needed medicine in the middle of the night. Claire sat and trembled as Bolt explained that a falling book had injured her ankle. Jake examined the girl's leg and said that the bone was damaged, so it was better not to walk anywhere for a while. In fact, the butler was very worried that the Marquis was injured, which is why he needed medicine so urgently. But the truth didn't seem to make it any easier either. Also, the servant was not entirely clear why Claire was visiting this library. This tower was built specifically for Bolt, and mainly this library contains complex historical and theological books. A large number of books must be written in Frankish, the language used by most nobles, or in languages such as Latin and Swedish. Jake has absolutely no idea why this girl is in a library like this. Bolt looked menacingly at the servant and ordered him to leave if he was finished, and Claire would desperately like to be left alone now. When Jake left the room, Bolt turned to the widow and called her a stupid woman. After all, if she was in so much pain, she should have bitten him to stop. Claire calmly replied that he would not allow this to be done. Then the Marquis leaned closer to the girl and asked if she really needed to explain where to bite a man so that he would pay attention to your words. She looked at this huge man and thought that he did not move when all these books fell on him. What was the point in resisting then? The pain became stronger. Claire began to tremble. It was impossible to endure. Her head was cloudy, barely able to pronounce the words. She apologized for not being able to serve the master today, and then she collapsed powerlessly right into his arms. Bolt tried to talk to her, but the girl only dreamed that this bastard would leave her alone. Claire was shaking, delirious and feverish, beads of sweat running down her face. She had a fever. When she was little, a demon visited her every night. He urged her to close her eyes and not think about anything, only about how her heart squeezes like soft bread. And then the parents whom the girl misses so much will be hers. Little Claire sat alone in a cold room and no one came to see her. She desperately prayed for the sun to rise and stop the demons whispering. And now it happens again. The voice of the dark entity asked what the girl could do. Even if she survived, there was no point in resisting. You just need to give up life. What Claire wanted most now was for the demon to leave her. Bolt stroked the girl's wet head, convincing her in a calm voice that everything would be fine. Through her sleep, she felt his warm hand. The Marquis looked at Claire's red face. Her body was burning, and heavy groans of choked breathing could be heard in the room every now and then. He lifted the fragile body and noted that the girl was sweating. His gaze filled with sympathy for the defenseless lady. Lord recalled how Claire said that she could not serve him in this condition. He had met many women who said ridiculous things, and this girl was just as annoying. Thoughts were spinning in my head. How it started, the brave and respected Marquis Morenheitz made a mistake because he could not keep it inside himself. War is a primitive thing, so he didn't hesitate to show his real self. And when he returned to the castle, he could not accept the peaceful life that was happening. Over time, it became more and more boring. Perhaps this is why, once his bloodthirsty nature awoke, the Lord lost control and ended up unleashing his disgusting lust. He even came up with an excuse that this was the norm, since the widow is a girl from the lower classes. She was still lying in his arms and breathing heavily. Why did she show such impudence? If she asked for forgiveness, he would have shown mercy as a marquis. Bolt got out of bed and thought Claire looked funny enduring this pain, but he wasn't annoyed. He took a glass of water from the bedside table, thinking that he should be kinder to this girl. The Marquis took some water into his mouth and passed it to Claire through a kiss. A few drops spilled, but she swallowed. He touched her wet lips and laid her back on the bed, but the girl's hand grabbed his shoulder. Claire muttered that she was cold, so the Lord lay down next to her, hugged her, and told her that she would soon feel better. In Puisan at Langtao Castle, Archduke Edwin wondered when the people from the Margraviate planned to leave. The servant explained that they were rushing to Langtao, so everything would be known soon. There was no reason to get excited. Edwin was angry and shouted at the butler, because he had been hearing the same words for several days. The Archduke noted that the Marquis was as impudent as his father. He was annoyed that if he had a son, he wouldn't have to humiliate himself like that. Everyone else gives birth to sons with ease. But for some reason, he and his brother have so many problems. The daughter causes more difficulties, having to jump through all the hoops in order to marry Martella's precious son. The servant noted that if His Highness accepts the grandson of Newburgh as his son-in-law, he will rule not only in this empire, but also in Svergen and other neighboring kingdoms. Edwin thought that this trouble could have been avoided if Bolt had not been given such an important title. His father was nice to everyone during his lifetime, except his sons and the mother of his children. Now the Archduke is interested in whether Bolt is really dating a girl now. According to rumors, the Marquis took some ordinary widow for himself, so there should be no problems with Brody's marriage. As long as they can have a child, Edwin is confident that Brody will be able to seduce Bolt herself. After all, his daughter is known as the greatest beauty of the Empire. Drops of rain beat on the walls of the heir's tower. The sky was gloomy and dark. The smell of wood soaked in rain is so refreshing. Claire so wanted to enjoy this air a little more. But suddenly the grey-haired woman called out to her. The girl was still not allowed to go out into the cold. It was Mrs. Ravia. She was appointed by the Marquis to take care of the widow, and the old lady actually did it. A couple of days ago, Claire had a conversation with the Marquis. He gave the butler a 2-week deadline for the lady to be able to walk again. He did not accept reservations or objections, so Jake could only agree. Although it was difficult to imagine how such an injury could heal in less than a month. Besides, it would be difficult for Lady Claire to be alone during this time. Then the Lord ordered to call Mrs. Ravia. It turns out that she was the Marquis's nanny in childhood. She always grumbled and was surprised that the Lord called such an old nanny, and also that the girl serving the Lord was such a baby. The nanny fed Claire in bed and even tried to help her bathe. Thanks to her, the widow began to live like a noble lady. But unfortunately, she also had to listen to reproaches for her thinness. The old woman's persistence reminded Claire of Aunt Gelda, which was probably why she didn't feel any discomfort. Yes, Claire had not seen her aunt for a long time, so she decided to ask if Mrs. Ravia had seen the children when she passed by. The nanny again grumbled and swore at the girl for her impatience, because first she should have eaten. But Claire has never been separated from her children for so long, they must be terribly bored. The girl thoughtfully swallowed the soup, and suddenly realized that it was very similar to what Aunt Gelda was preparing, and Mrs. Ravia confirmed her guesses, because she went to her aunt and took this gift. The nanny also noted the aunt's good abilities in cooking, sewing and washing. It is not clear how such skinny people managed to work until now. Out of impatience, Claire shouted out a question about the children, and Mrs. Ravia said that they were fine too. Apparently, Finn goes up the mountain to get firewood with the other kids, and the cook rewards him with pie for it. Claire's face broke into a smile, but the nanny's question about why she was pretending to be the mother of other people's children hit her like a blow to the head. Her hands were sweating, her cheeks were flushed. How could Mrs. Ravia know this? Although, according to the butler in the past, this woman was the only person who could give orders to the Marquis. The old lady works for the Marquis and most likely reports everything Claire tells her. Morinhites not only put her in this prison without bars, but also assigned someone to keep an eye on her. Perhaps the Marquis is more obsessed with the widow than she initially thought. At this time, Bolt himself was sitting in his office in the presence of his retinue and reported that Puisson's merchant ship was again attacked by pirates. He stood up, pushed back his chair, and ordered someone to be secretly sent to the Jurassic Sea. Without a doubt, the person leading the pirates must be quite capable, so you need to find out how their powers work. The Lord went to the window and thought how such a leader appeared so suddenly. One of the advisors heard that the Marquis was even going to exclude the Teutonic Knights from the campaign, and then the only assistant would be his second son, Max, which causes concern. Even a lion would have a hard time surviving in a cave full of poisonous snakes. Geneva's only weakness is that most of her vassals are knights. Although a university is being built to solve this problem, the situation is unstable because Baron Kainitz, responsible for the project, is not well. If the Baron goes down, his younger brother Jake will have to take over everything, so he can't be sent to spy on the pirates. I wonder what the Marquis is thinking about, who has been silently looking out the window at the tower for a long time. At this time, Claire was quietly walking along the corridor of the tower, holding onto the wall, and she was amused by the thought that she could still hear Mrs. Ravia swearing. Claire's story about her brother impressed the nanny very much, and she began to sympathize with the widow more, and in order to see her aunt, the girl needs understanding from Mrs. Ravia. Claire looked out the window and thought that the Marquis had not visited her since that night. For some reason, the girl's memories of that day become clearer over time. Although she has not felt such pain for a long time, it disappeared at some point during the night. Claire realized that the Marquis had been comforting her all night with his warm hands. Then she experienced something unknown until that moment. This feeling was almost enough to relieve the pain in her leg. The widow doesn't even want to be offended by him now for his cruelty that night. And for that matter, she's disappointed that the Marquis stopped coming to her. No, you need to pull yourself together. The pain must be affecting you. It should go away soon. With difficulty, Claire climbed the stone slabs of the stairs. These steps were very difficult to climb. But still, she couldn't give up books, especially when she felt as confused as she did now. It's incredible that she had such feelings for the man who hurt her ankle, when suddenly a hand appeared out of nowhere. She pulled Claire towards her, and the girl found herself in Morenheitz's arms. The widow was surprised, and the man noticed that she had gained weight. She was even more struck by these words after several days of absence. So they found themselves in a bright, comfortable room where Claire was headed. She looked fascinated at the clean and tidy library. Everything was shining. Bolt amazed the girl even more when he handed her a history book that she had read earlier. Did he really remember that? The lady opened the book, and the Marquis suddenly asked who taught her to read. So Claire realized that the Lord had not helped her get here out of the kindness of his heart. I had to tell you that I learned to read on my own. As a child, Claire cleaned the library of someone she served, and naturally the writing became familiar to her. But Bolt was not stupid. He naturally did not believe that a simple maid learned Latin simply by visiting the library. And I thought to myself whether this girl was arrogant or stupid. She climbed the stairs, despite her ankle injury, just to read a history book. Then Claire's tone changed, and she began to talk about her imprisonment. Her mother died after the birth of her daughter. The girl herself was abandoned in the old library, and after living there alone for several years, she learned to read. Then the Marquis asked Claire why her mother died. The girl replied that the woman was trying to escape from the man who threatened her. He was the son of the master she served, so she threw herself into the Kria River. Bolt was surprised to hear this tragic story, but he was more surprised that the girl did not shed a single tear and remained extremely calm. Her soul must have become numb to these endless misfortunes, just as his was numb to death after so many battlefields. During the conversation, it turned out that Claire could read not only Latin, but also Frankish and Svergen. Then Bolt said that he could recommend something. Because if you ask Ravia for books, she will treat the widow like a plague. The Marquis handed the book to the girl and, seeing the confusion, thought that she was not a fan of theological books, but she was just surprised that the Lord allowed her to read it. And scribes are also quite rare, so books are considered more expensive than jewelry. These books are most likely worth unimaginable sums. Bolt also inquired about the relationship between Claire and Mrs. Ravia. The girl, of course, replied that she gets along with the nanny. And then the widow decided to say that she was unpleasant that the old woman had actually been sent to keep an eye on her. The Marquis was surprised by this conclusion. Why would she follow a woman with a broken leg for fear that she would run away? In any case, she was already his. If she slept with him to pay off her debt, why would he waste time on surveillance? And even if Claire ran away, she would just have to make a decision. Kill her with one blow or tear her to pieces. A trembling ran through the girl's body. She blushed and turned away, and the Marquis sat on the edge of the table as if nothing had happened, even joked about his love for grey hair when he saw an illustration in an open book. The Marquis was carried away by the condemnation of this book and declared that everything was wrong, and Claire's eyes were filled with childish curiosity. She really wanted to know if Emperor Ringen really had light golden hair. And from the thought that the Lord saw the Emperor with his own eyes, the girl completely melted. Bolt replied that this was indeed so, but he could not remember the great ruler, but his portrait hangs in the hall. And seeing Claire's interest, he grabbed her around the waist and suggested that she beg him to see the portrait in person. Let her say that she will do anything, and then he will take her there, let her burn and get what he wants. After all, it's easier to read Latin, and he kissed her passionately. It was a sunny day. Deer were grazing at the edge of the forest, when suddenly an arrow flew almost silently into the side of the animal. The knights admired the Marquis's eagle gaze. Julian said that Jack had found a fine white horse as a gift for the Archduke, and one of the young men was willing to train the mare. Bolt joked about teaching her how to dump a cowgirl. Is Julian still obsessed with going to Langthew Castle? This, of course, makes sense, since the Archduke is the main enemy of the Teutonic Knights. The Teutonic Knights, as a mercenary campaign, began to serve the first emperor after receiving the order, and in those days, the only condition of the emperor was the obligation to serve only the direct heirs of the family, and all in order to protect the concubine's unborn child. Be that as it may, after the death of the emperor, Kilveric took the throne from his newborn sister, and he made his mother empress, demanding the obedience of the knights of the Teutonic Order. The Teutonic Knights refused to serve him and left the palace, causing the current ruling family to declare them traitors and bend them to their will. After the Archduke poisoned the general of the order, a war almost broke out, but the wise father Martel Mohrenheitz hired the knights into his service, and the conflict was temporarily hushed up. Bolt knows exactly what Julian will do to the Archduke, so why even think about whether to take the knights with him or not? Here, Max let the horses go, reporting that Baron Kienitz seemed to have passed away 2 days ago. A messenger from Solz had just arrived, heading to meet Jake. Another arrow reached the spotted victim. Bolt looked back at Julian and said that everything here remains on him. On the way, it turned out that the Baron fell from his horse because he was hiding his illness. Bolt had no idea that Max was so attached to the deceased Kienitz. But he justified himself by saying that now he was the only newcomer without a title, and besides, the presence of this family in Geneva is certainly important. Although perhaps the master is going to return Baron Kienitz back to Solz, or there is an option to keep it with you, as Sir Martel did. But all this talk irritated Bolt. A delegation was already standing near the castle gates, and Max, seeing his father, decided to quickly leave in a different direction. The servant greeted the master and asked whether the Marquis had heard about the terrible tragedy. Solz and Volador now need Jake, and there are still not enough scribes. All this is so inopportune. Bolt first of all asked where Jake was now. He was told that the butler was in the heir's tower, and this saddened the Marquis. Meanwhile, Jake sat at the widow's feet, bandaging her ankle. She said that her leg did not hurt if you did not step on it, and turned to her doctor with the title of Baron. He replied indifferently that there was no inheritance document, so he was still the head butler, so there was no point in worrying. But the girl still felt awkward, and besides, Jake would probably move to Solz. But the butler replied that after his brother's funeral, he would return here, because this work corresponded to his destiny. Such a life was determined for him from the moment he was born as the second son in the Kienitz family. Jake said he wouldn't have to wear the splint anymore, but Claire was more interested in what he was going to do next. This sudden question made the newly minted Baron nervous. The widow repeated the question. If Jake was free to choose without the permission of the Marquis, would he want to stay in Volador? The butler went out and pondered this strange thought. Making a choice without the permission of the Marquis, it had never occurred to him. His family had served the Mohrenheitz for generations. His brother was to become the next Baron Kienitz, and he himself was the head butler. They were raised for this. This has always been perceived as a decree of fate from which you cannot escape. Although in his youth, it was difficult for Jake to come to terms with the predetermination of his fate, but after serving the Marquis for some time, he stopped thinking about it. This question of what he was going to do, haunted Kienitz. To make a choice without the permission of the Marquis is even funny. Jake knocked and entered the Lord's office, who said that he had just spoken with Count Schweiven about him. He conveyed his condolences to the butler, and Bolt asked if the Baron had found an owner for his lands. But Jake replied that he would do this after his brother's funeral. He assured the Marquis that he had nothing to worry about. Kienitz Jr. would make sure that this situation did not affect the campaign to Langthew. The Count noted that he had requested 30 scribes from the monastery. This number should be enough to prepare books for the university. Bolt stood up from the table, put his hand on Baron Kienitz's shoulder, and wished him good luck on his trip to Solz, while Jake thought that in any case he would always follow the Marquis. Later in the library, Mohrenheitz sat next to Claire, who was reading, and they looked at each other. The girl decided to ask whether the head butler would remain in Volador. This question amused Bolt, and he took the book from the widow. She was indignant and said that this was a question from Mrs. Ravia. She wanted to understand the wishes of the Marquis. The Lord replied that the decision was not up to him but to Jake. And if the Marquis does not like this decision, then he himself will not allow it. Claire wondered if Bolt would remain adamant even if Jake begged him. The Marquis thought for a moment, and then a grin appeared on his face. He took a strand of the girl's hair and said that she might try to pity him. She turned away, and the Lord sarcastically remarked that she simply did not have enough talent or even willpower, but it was worth trying at least for his care. Claire remembered that the Marquis actually carried her in his arms to the library every night, so the nanny stopped treating her like she had the plague. Then the girl said that she would pay for everything when she recovered a little. A little irritably, she confirmed that she would work twice as hard once the leg was fully recovered. These words surprised the Marquis. He looked carefully at Claire. She said that she would serve the Lord whenever and wherever he wanted, as long as he waited for his leg to recover. Bolt reproached her for the inappropriateness of such words, but the girl was even more embarrassed because it was all said out of despair. This interested the Marquis. He raised Claire's chin and looked into her eyes to find out what she wanted so badly: to hang herself with jewelry. Claire moved her large hand away and replied that she just wanted to see her family. but the Marquis was already sick of talking about this damned family. Is it really not enough that standing by she sees children who, by the way, are not even hers? He was annoyed at the woman's stupidity, but Claire insisted. If he allows her to leave the tower, she will see the children and return soon. The Marquis said that he didn't stop her anyway, but Claire asked for a horse and cart. Bolt grinned. This was already too brazen, so if the widow was so desperate, she could crawl there, and if not, then she didn't really want to. Claire was very stubborn, so she decided to follow the Marquis's advice, got down on all fours and crawled towards the exit. Bolt naturally did not count on such a trick, so he immediately picked her up from the floor and sat her on the table. He was overwhelmed with rage. Is it really impossible to choose a simpler option than to do something so crazy? Why is she acting so stupid? But the girl objected. Because she can't even move on her own. What else should she do? The Marquis grinned and reminded him that he was still there, and if he tried hard enough, he would release the cart. She looked up at him with a determined look and asked him to take her as before. This was not enough for the Lord. He wanted Claire to make him glow, to make him want to create for her. And if he doesn't, then even after her death, he will never let her go. They kissed passionately. Claire sometimes had to catch her breath. Bolt held her in his arms and couldn't enjoy it to the end. It wasn't enough for him. He tossed it onto the table and got rid of his clothes, even if it would break his heart one day. So after a while, Claire was visiting her aunt. She was dyeing the girl's hair. The widow was worried that she needed to finish quickly before the children woke up. But Gelder did not want to rush. Moreover, he kept swearing at that pervert who came up with the idea of breaking the poor girl's leg. Claire was worried that her aunt's screams would wake the children, but they slept soundly, like marmots. And the woman was also interested in whether this damned Marquis had allocated a cart for Claire. The girl looked away and embarrassedly replied that when she woke up, the cart was already standing near the tower. The thought flashed through my head that perhaps this was due to a successful night. Strange thoughts swirled in her head. She wrung out her hair with a towel and turned to her aunt. Claire seems to like the Marquis. Aunt Gelder was not at all surprised. Throughout her childhood, she called the girl the most beautiful child on earth. Auntie is too kind, that's why she said such things to her thin niece, whom she found in the basement. Although she was disappointed that she left traces of her parents in that place, holding Aunt Gelder's hand, Claire got out of that hell. The girl turned to her aunt and asked if she really looked like her mother. Gelder confirmed that her niece was just a copy of her sister, a striking resemblance, and most of all, Claire's mother dissolved after meeting her father. The aunt patted the girl on the head and asked her not to forget that she was the most precious treasure in the elderly woman's life. Moreover, Gelder is sure that Claire will become even more beautiful than her mother. But the widow herself thought that she would not be able to shine like that, because most likely she would be absorbed by the Marquis. In the Lord's office, Count Schwaven asked whether it was worth starting to sign trade agreements with neighboring duchies. But all Bolt's thoughts were absorbed in the view from the window. He looked at the tower and thought that Claire should have returned by now. Her name echoed in his mind. Before he had been embarrassed to say her name out loud. But now her heart jumps out of her chest every time she says it. The Marquis did not expect her to become anything more than just a girl in a tower. And now he gets pleasure from her inexperienced body and even rewards it. What an absurdity. The Count recalled his presence and offered to negotiate with La Paz in the south. But even here the Lord's thoughts were about her, because Claire catches cold so often it would be nice to take her to the south. The Marquis had already said this out loud, so Schwaven had to ask again. They agreed at the negotiations on the condition that Geneva would use the port this winter. The conversation was over, the Count took his leave and thought that the Marquis had somehow changed. Later, Count Schwaven headed to the training ground to visit his son. He knew that Max would be able to answer the question of what kind of woman lives in that tower. The knight was outraged that his father, having an unmarried son, was interested in what Bolt had in his pants. But the Count reminded him that Max himself had chosen this path. The young man did not understand. If his father was so interested in that woman, and the Marquis's attitude towards her, why not ask the gentleman himself? The Count reflected that he himself was making observations. At first the Lord did not seem interested, but lately he had been visiting her often. Therefore, Schwaven instructed his son to keep an eye on this woman and the Marquis. Max doubted the need for this event, because this relationship would not last long, but his father thought otherwise. He saw that something had already changed. The Marquis's gaze lingered on the tower several times, and this had never happened before. The Count had already forgotten about the existence of this woman. When did she manage to influence the Lord so much? It is necessary to carefully monitor whether she will help the Marquis or harm him. On the third floor of the tower, the fireplace was burning. Claire and Bolt were sitting on the sofa. They were reading. The Marquis looked at the girl and decided to ask why she was in such a good mood. She replied that the kids were a little rounder and continued reading, and the Lord was annoyed that she was talking about these little brats again. He was worried that the widow herself looked thin and did not try to dress up at all, apparently did not want to thank him. But I must admit her pink face was pleasant to look at. Bolt reached closer to the girl and kissed her. The book in her hands trembled and her cheeks flushed even more. He noted that Claire's hair smelled like grass. Was she really rolling around in the forest with a sore leg? He also asked if the widow needed anything else, because it was time to ask, because he intended to take her now. Claire said that the splint had just been removed, so she asked him to be careful with his leg. The Marquis covered the girl's body with kisses, and quiet moans were heard in the room. Bolt got rid of his shirt, noticing that there was a very strange scent on Claire's skin. They kissed for a long time, when suddenly the girl heard her name being called. She stood up, pushing the giant body of the Marquis away from her. Her voice sounded very much like Aunt Gelda. There was a knock on the door. It was Dylan, a knight of the Teutonic Order. He apologized, but still reported that a woman was standing in the yard because the eldest child seemed to have disappeared in the forest. Beside herself with horror, Claire tried to approach the knight and find out the details, but her legs became weak and she fell to the floor. The Marquis did not like the extra noise. He began to lift the girl, but she desperately wanted to see her aunt. He explained to her that she would not achieve anything by doing this, but Claire was going to go on a search. The Marquis asked not to anger him if the girl did not want to be tied up, but she begged. The widow believed that Finn was lost because of her. She left, and he went looking for her. She had to stay with them, and now she could only beg and plead with the Marquis. After all, he enjoys watching her beg. Claire began to escape from the Marquis's hands, and he, indignant, threw her onto the sofa. Then the Lord took the handkerchief and tightly tied the widow's hands, because his words before were not an empty threat. Claire screamed and asked to let her go, because now was not the time to do all this. But the decisions here were made by the Marquis. She tried to break free, twitched desperately, and shouted insults after the departing Bolt. Morenheitz at the door glanced at her and ordered her to be a good girl if she wanted a chance to at least get her child's corpse back. The door closed and Claire thought the damn bastard was just a demon. She screamed, but no one heard. Tears flowed from her eyes. The girl asked forgiveness from Jenna, the children's mother, for asking her to take care of them. That day, Claire made a promise that she would keep these children safe, even if it meant putting her life on the line. She can't lose her family again, a worry similar to the helpless anticipation of death as a child, but now she has someone to protect. If something happens to Finn, Claire vows to plunge a knife into the Marquis's heart. Near the gate of the tower, the knights were holding a woman who, straining herself, asked to see her niece. Bolt watched what was happening from the window. Dylan noted that he did not expect this woman to overcome the thorn hedge. She crossed the field of thorny thorns from the house to here. Yes, the Marquis is not surprised that it is Aunt Claire. Bolt moved forward, asking the knight about the details of the boy's disappearance. He was definitely not there at dawn, most likely. He went to look for his mother in the evening. Now people are inspecting the territory. The last trace of the child was found where the wolf pack was often seen, so a plan of action is needed from the master. People actually walked through the forest with torches and called out to Finn at the top of their voices. They whispered among themselves, because they did not know whether the boy would even be alive. Several hours had already passed. Several decades ago, Bolt spent a lot of time in the tower, and to prevent strangers from passing through, his grandfather fenced it off with thorn bushes, the exit from which lies through the mountains or the valley. The mountains are too steep for a 5-year-old child to climb, so the Marquis ordered them to move into the valley. If the boy had come this far, then most likely he was tired and frightened by the cries of wild animals, and on instinct he would want to hide. Bolt pushed aside the spruce branches and saw a little boy whispering the word Mom. The Marquis looked at the lump, remembering how Claire talked about the fatness of children. Gelda was still being held by the knights while she was trying to go look for Finn, when suddenly the Marquis made a caustic joke about character traits that are inherited. The woman saw a large man with a baby in his hands. The Marquis handed the child into the hands of his aunt, who hugged him close to her. Then Bolt ordered the woman and child to be escorted home and a doctor called. The Marquis turned to Dylan and asked why he had arranged all this. Noise should not be created in the tower without the Lord's permission. The knight bowed and apologized. The situation seemed rather dire, so he hurried without thinking. Morenheitz granted the Teutonic Knights their freedom in exchange only for unconditional loyalty. However, if they had gone out to search even a little later, perhaps the outcome would have been different. Bolt asked to deal with such things on his own from now on, and Dylan already understood that he would have problems with the captain. But if the woman who looks towards the village every day, having lost her child, would have broken into pieces, and if not for the Marquis, the child would not have survived. Bolt returned to the tower, and the view he found there pleasantly surprised him. Claire sat silently, tied to the bed, but as soon as he entered, she asked to urgently untie her. There were red marks on the girl's hand from an attempt to escape. The Marquis was annoyed that she could not sit still for a couple of hours. Claire begged the Marquis to answer if everything was okay with her child. Her recklessness irritated the Lord. As the owner of the land, it is his responsibility to ensure the safety of the child, but she continues to provoke his barbaric side. So he replied that the boy had been eaten by wolves, so it was time to stop shaking. The Marquis approached the shocked girl, continuing to say cruel things. They spend every night together, so if Claire needs another child to take care of him, but this sentence was not completed. After the words, "Close your mouth," a red mark from the slap appeared on the Marquis's face. Claire was in labor because she realized what she had done. The Lord's gaze was icy. The girl held the hand with which she made this greatest mistake and waited for the end. Rather, she was more afraid not for her life, but for the life of her family. Claire experienced the greatest fear and horror. She tried to utter a word, but stuttered. For the Marquis, this fear was ironic because this woman is the only one who looks down on her. Bolt left the room, telling the servant that he was returning to the main castle. There was no need to prepare the horse, he wanted to walk. Mohrenheitz first killed a person when he was only 13 years old. After the death of an assassin from the Svergan Empire who had infiltrated the tower, Bolt realized that he too was an assassin who enjoyed the sight of blood. After the incident, the father sent the boy to the battlefield ahead of schedule to ease his brutal instincts. He has also worked hard to teach his son to control himself, but it appears that Bolt is now on the brink. The Marquis ordered the tower to be vacated tomorrow and the woman to be dealt with so that she would not come into his sight. Time passed, work was in full swing on the river, the maids were washing clothes. Naturally, they gossiped. Today they were talking about how the Marquis's packing yesterday was not because he was going on a hike. It is unclear whether he was accompanied by a knightly order, but the Lord seems to have suddenly gone hunting. Perhaps this move was made to annoy the Archduke, because he is impatiently waiting for the Marquis right now. He would not want the Lord to become the Archduke's son-in-law. However, it is true that now there is no suitable noble lady for the master, and in general the Marquis is not particularly looking for meetings with women. He only accepted that woman in the tower. But then the same former guest of the tower passed by the gossips, and the girls fell silent. They knew that Claire had been kicked out, and also noted her young age for motherhood. Someone thought that the widow would still last a long time, since she was given a tower, but apparently the Marquis did not like her thin figure. Claire did not listen to empty talk. She thought that several days had already passed since that night. The Lord had left for work, and the girl had started work. The Marquis still supports her family, but she has to live with servants, and she quickly got used to the sidelong glances. While the master is away, the head maid ordered the cleaning of the third floor of the castle. All the maids have a marked area for work. Claire got the job of cleaning the corner corridors. Some people even feel sorry for her after hearing what happened to her. So kindly, with a bad leg, mopping the floors is the optimal job. Now that the daily workload has arrived, Claire has no time to worry. Finn was back safe, which was all she needed, and it wasn't until she met Aunt Gelda that she learned who really saved the child. It is not clear why the Marquis said those words to the widow, and if he is a great warrior of the Empire, why he allowed himself to be hit. After that slap, Claire thought that she would die immediately. She must have looked pathetic at that moment, but now it doesn't matter, because she won't see this person again. She realized that she was lost in her thoughts again, so she began to convince herself that everything was for the best, and also busily scrubbed the floor until she came across a stunning painting on the wall. Claire froze in amazement. She knew exactly who the blonde man in the portrait was. Suddenly, another man found himself next to the girl, only this one was already real. It was Count Schwaven, and Claire immediately realized that since this nobleman could easily move around the castle, it meant that he was part of the Marquis's close circle. He was interested in what the maid was doing here because maids were prohibited from entering here, and the girl bowed with an apology. The Count also noticed the bandage on Claire's leg and asked her to be careful, and she had already plucked up the courage to ask a disturbing question. Her gaze was drawn to the painting, and Claire asked if the portrait depicted Emperor Ringen himself. It was true. The fair-haired young man in a fur coat is the very first ruler of the Empire. Claire now realized that he looked different here than in the drawing she had seen in the book. In general, this is logical, because no one will put any effort into books intended for commoners. The Count was wondering what kind of book the maid was referring to, and when he heard the title, The History of the Continent of Roshman, he was pretty surprised. Moreover, Claire even allowed herself to talk about the fate of the overthrowers and their moral qualities, because they generally described the emperor as an ordinary groom. The maid seemed very strange to the count, especially when she ran away so as not to continue the topic of reading. The former Marquis, Lord Newburgh, liked to say that Emperor Ringen wanted to create a world where even commoners could read. Yes, it was a dream, but time passed along with Martel. He left this world and the imperial family became mired in corruption. So, as long as Count Schweiven lives in this world, he is simply obliged to make Bolt the next emperor. He is ready to make any sacrifice in the name of this dream, just like Martel. Bolt has always been special, so the Count thinks the Marquis will make a great ruler. Schweiven suddenly remembered how his little godson Bolt had also been indignant in childhood that the emperor had been made into an ordinary groom. When night fell and all the maids went to bed in their shared beds, Claire still couldn't sleep. She quietly left the room with a shuffling gait. There was silence in the castle without an owner. The girl sat down on the stairs and decided to take a nap here. To be honest, on days like this, she missed the time spent in the tower, how she could read books in the library at night. This is so stupid. Claire dreamed of a family so much because she couldn't imagine what it would be like to live completely alone, and now she misses the quiet life in the tower. Suddenly the door creaked. The girl saw the Marquis returning home. She bowed and apologized, muttering something about servants, but he walked past, completely ignoring the widow. Apparently the Lord really lost interest in her. It is not clear why then his heart is so heavy. A new day dawned, and when the Marquis and the Knightly Order returned from the hunt, the work increased noticeably. Deer, bears, even wild ox. There is no end to the skins and everything needs to be washed before they go bad. Claire was even glad that she finally had something to do, because when she met him after so long, the first thing she felt was fear. On the one hand, she was so afraid for her life, and now the maid can only plow to forget. On the other hand, there was that strange feeling too, but no, my heart was probably ready to jump out of my chest, only because of wounded pride. Suddenly, an angry Aunt Gelda appeared out of nowhere. She was unhappy that Claire was here again. Auntie asked not to go out anywhere today. The girl's fragile body would not be able to withstand processing the skins for so many days in a row. The woman took the scarf off her niece's head and continued to swear that she simply looked terrible. Auntie brought Claire to the river so that she could finally wash herself and change into clean clothes. The girl was a little reluctant, but still sat down on a large log and began asking about the children. It turned out that the boys were already playing somewhere, and Mrs. Ravia was taking care of Rudia. Gelda helped her niece wash, and Claire wondered if Mrs. Ravia was having trouble visiting the estate. After all, terrible things could happen if the Marquis finds out about this. The aunt became thoughtful. The nanny was indeed called to the palace, but the Marquis had not yet indicated the time when it would be time for her to leave. Gelda was sure that even the most callous man would not dare to intimidate the nanny who raised him from the cradle. The girl remained in her nightgown and plunged into the water. The last trace left by the Marquis disappeared. She felt completely cleansed. Auntie really likes the color of Claire's eyes. It reminds her of her sister's eyes, but the girl herself hates it because this blue color only provoked trouble. By the way, they also had to flee Puisan because of these eyes. One evil knight constantly mocked her because of the blue color, and one day Endin, quite tired of this, beat him until he bled. Then they had to flee from the knights and hide in Geneva. Perhaps she was also in the Marquisate because of her eyes. I remembered again the moment of their first meeting, when she promised to do whatever he wanted. Throughout her life, Claire has suffered a lot of bullying from many oppressive men. How could she be so rash? And even so, she continued to secretly hope that the Marquis, recognized as the unsurpassed warrior of the Empire, would be different from other nobles. Endine said that the Margraves were the only heroes left in the Empire. Due to her brother's constant exaggerations, expectations were higher than the highest mountains. But perhaps she shouldn't constantly blame others. She would also now get rid of the strange feeling that visited her last night. The aunt was worried about her niece's well-being, and she suddenly asked if she still considered her the most beautiful child. Gelda put her hand on the girl's face and said that she was charming, the most dazzling girl in the whole world. A smile touched Claire's face. She bowed at her aunt's feet and asked her to repeat these wonderful words. The Marquis watched what was happening from the bushes. He looked at the girl with regret. Max was also with him in his ever-cheerful manner. He asked why Bolt had suddenly stopped, and then he himself saw how the maids were having fun in the water and made a couple of dirty jokes. The Lord ordered the knight in a cold tone to close his eyes until he allowed them to open again. At this time, the Archduke was tearing and throwing bottles at the wall and shouting at his servants. He was outraged that while accompanied by a naval fleet, the pirates still managed to lay siege to his ships. the frightened sailors suggested that the Archduke turn to the Marquis for help, because he was already almost Edwin's son-in-law. But the Archduke began to spin this idea further, namely accusing the Marquis in general of failing to fulfill his duties in protecting the borders, so Edwin urgently wanted to see Bolt in Langtao. The next night, Claire walked contentedly along the castle corridor, holding a bucket and a rag in her hands. The day before, the head maid was worried that she had not cleaned the third floor, and the girl volunteered to do it. Thanks to this work, the widow could look at the portrait again. Her blue eyes were full of admiration when she saw the emperor again. But Claire was not the only one admiring the painting. Behind her, a descendant of the man from the portrait was peeking out from behind the curtain. He was pleased to find a widow in this place. At first, it seemed to him that his peace was disturbed by a rat running past. Then he began to think about how to punish this unlucky maid. At this time, Claire stood in front of the portrait, spellbound, and even blushed a little with embarrassment. Bolt had no idea that this woman could smile so radiantly. As expected, she liked men like the emperor. That's why she can't even take her eyes off him. She doesn't even realize that the Marquis is standing right behind her. Emperor Ringen's face particularly infuriated the Lord today. Claire reached out to the portrait to touch it, but realized in time that she was not allowed to touch such a thing. This amused the Lord, who received a slap from her. Bolt decided that the maid had been standing in front of the painting for too long, so he walked closer to her and grabbed her shoulder, suggesting that she take a few steps back to get a better look at the painting. Claire didn't expect to see the Marquis now, so fear flashed in her eyes again. To tell the truth, it was more unexpected to see her here and not the owner of the castle. Mohrenheitz was irritated by the admiration with which the girl looked at the man in the portrait, despite the fact that she couldn't even look up at him. In fact, Bolt was planning to visit Puizen after returning from a hunt. If he had not looked again into those eyes that shine brighter than the starry sky, he would have already crossed the border to Geneva. Claire dresses in shabby rags and works with other maids, but still attracts the attention of the Marquis, his eyes always looking for only this woman in the crowd. The widow explained that she came here only for the purpose of cleaning and did not want to seem suspicious. Bolt sarcastically noted that he had not seen her with a rag in her hands. Claire apologized for interrupting the gentleman's rest and promised to leave immediately, but he reminded her that it was not she who made the decisions. His words greatly hurt the girl. She felt even more worthless, but the Marquis asked her to raise her head, inviting her to a place from which the portrait could be better seen. Bolt moved her and said that she should enjoy the portrait in its entirety since she came, and also inquired about her ankle. The Marquis was absolutely calm, and Claire was absolutely disarmed. She replied that the ankle had completely recovered and no longer hurt. Bolt also noted the girl's thinness, although he thought that she would receive the necessary help. After all, it was for this reason that he sent Ravia to the estate. For sure, at least the children's cheeks became rounder. Claire thought that the Marquis had forgotten about her existence, so her soul became restless again. She timidly took him by the sleeve and thanked him. With complete sincerity, she thanked him for saving Finn. Bolt turned away in slight embarrassment, answering that he was not saving anyone, but was just passing by. But Claire said again in a gentle, quiet voice that she wanted to thank the gentleman. And the girl, blushing with embarrassment, asked for forgiveness. The Marquis was silent, so the widow decided to clarify that she meant a slap in the face. She timidly continued that she was very angry, but still regretted what happened. Besides, she did not know that Bolt saved Finn. The Lord decided to clarify whether she had told people that she had hit the gentleman. Although no one would have believed her anyway, the Marquis asked to erase this episode from memory, as he did. Claire was still worried about this situation, so she decided to clarify that injustice had been shown to her as well. The Marquis was surprised by the woman's behavior because she usually answered his questions in monosyllables and avoided eye contact. She continued to babble about how if she had known about saving Finn, she would never have done that. Bolt walked closer to the widow and noticed that she was apologizing as if she wanted to be forgiven and returned to the tower. He whispered her name in her ear and bit into the lady's warm neck. Claire pushed the Lord away and was indignant. This was not her desire. And what did she expect when starting such a conversation with this arrogant man? The girl turned around and walked away. She began to demonstratively wash the floor, since the Marquis did not understand at all what she wanted to say. The maid was scrubbing the floor, but at the same time she understood that she should not behave like that in such a situation. You need to crawl on your knees in front of him and thank him as you have never thanked anyone, as a woman imprisoned in a tower should behave. But Claire is not like that. She can't do that. She continued to frantically wash the floor while the Marquis approached the girl. The tension grew. The maid tried to distract herself but could not. It seems that the Marquise knew about her feelings even before she confessed everything. The man came close to her, took her hand, and loudly said that she was being stupid, and if she had something to say, she should say it directly, looking into her eyes. Claire stood up and, in a nervous tone, thanked the Marquis once again for saving Finn and apologized. But this does not mean at all that she wants to return to the tower and roll in the hay with the master. The girl's heart sank. She understood that she was born with a terrible character, so if she had to die because of him, then so be it. The anger reached its limit, and Claire was already screaming that such a life was no better than being born an animal. And for the Marquis, this was the last straw. He knocked the woman to the floor and leaned over her, pressing her thigh to him. The Lord invited her to look at the real beast, and the maid understood that the Lord always behaves this way when something does not go according to his plan. Previously, if she found herself in such a situation, she would have been scared, but now the girl pulled the Marquis to her and kissed him passionately. She was determined not to indulge the Marquis's temptations any longer. The Lord really liked this game, he didn't mind. Finally, he could feel like a real animal, so he grabbed the woman's pink thigh with his teeth. The man's clothes quickly left his body, and he was already caressing Claire's breasts with his lips. She moaned and pulled him closer, pressing herself against his muscular body. The girl ran her finger over the lips on Bolt's enthusiastic face, after which he attacked the girl with renewed vigor. Morning came, the sun was shining brightly, illuminating the hall on the 3rd floor, and the rustling of a dress was heard from around the corner. The headmaid could not believe what she saw, and was shaking with fear when suddenly the owner of the castle found her. In his arms he held a sleeping girl covered with a sheet. He handed the widow into the hands of the headmaid, and asked him to take care of her. And while the woman was babbling over Claire, the Marquis asked him to tell the butler that in 2 days early in the morning they were leaving for Langa. There was noise and hubbub in the courtyard and in the castle. Maids were rushing around with different boxes, the halls were cleaned, the knights were getting ready to go on a campaign. Lord Keenitz walked along the red carpet. Everyone was glad to see him back, especially the Marquis, who was getting ready for a trip. Jake entered the master's office and apologized for being away for too long, but the Baron was finally able to delegate his responsibilities to support the lands and university business. The confidant is an experienced and extremely altruistic man. He excelled in architecture and even took an active part in the reconstruction of the monastery in Salts. And this trusted representative sent a request to send a large number of clerks from Volador to the monastery. After all, unfortunately, half of the scribes already sent suffer from food poisoning. Then Bolt gave the go-ahead to send new people and said that he was going to take that woman with him. Jake was surprised whether the gentleman was talking about Claire and whether he really wanted to take her on a hike. A maid worked under the windows of the castle, whom the Lord plans to take to the festival in Langthew. The Marquis smiled and asked the butler to include Claire in the official list without her knowing about it. The Baron did not even imagine how this could be accomplished, but he could not argue with the gentleman. Jake was even more confused about what the Marquis was really up to. All the maids were working hard at this time, carrying heavy loads. Not every spine can withstand this. However, with a big holiday approaching, it is not surprising that the Lord takes so many things with him. Claire saw how the maids were suffering and tried to help them, but the head maid stopped her, also giving the others time to rest. The tired girls ran to the kitchen to have a snack, leaving only Madame and Claire in the yard. However, the widow didn't look like she was happy about the break. Madame remarked that everyone knew that Claire was different from the other maids. These words caused a malicious smile from the girl, because all the maids dress in the same shabby clothes, do the same work, and eat the same food. Madame saw Claire's tension and panicked, making the excuse that the widow only had reasons to make her more tired, like what happened last night. The girl thanked the headmaid for her help, because she herself would not even be able to wash herself. Claire was very ashamed of that incident, but the women were very friendly, took the girl's hand, and said that there was nothing to thank her for. "It's so hard to raise children alone." These words surprised Claire. Madame explained that her husband was taken to the front. He was killed during the war, so she had to raise her daughter alone, but she left this world due to the spread of the epidemic. Therefore, the woman understands perfectly how difficult it is to raise children alone, and also that a widow does not have much choice. The girl was surprised, because it was the first time someone other than Aunt Gelda had said something like that to her. In addition, Madame condemns the Marquis for cruelty and satisfying his needs in such a dirty way. Claire was very embarrassed by the conversation with such revelations, so she said that she needed to get some fresh air and ran away. It seemed to her that she was going crazy, because last night she pressed her naked body against the Marquis and moaned shamelessly, and today she not only thinks about it, but wants it again. The girl was scared by these thoughts, so she wanted to escape from this terrible place as soon as possible. She will be herself again when she gets out of this cage, and when the Marquis leaves for the festival, she will not meet him again. Immersed in thoughts of a bright future, where feelings would recede, Claire did not notice the approaching Lord Keenitz. He came to convey a message from the Marquis. A gentleman wants a lady to accompany him to a festival in Langthew. Claire cursed. She was shocked and very angry. She felt that this man had completely lost his mind. She burst into Jake's office and began wiping the table with a rag. He was surprised by this outburst, but the girl explained that the maid could rarely be caught without a rag. Lord Keenitz could not understand anything and tried to explain to Claire that she did not need to do this. After all, the procession will soon set off on the road. The ladies need to go get ready. The girl was angry and sarcastic. She tried to figure out what exactly she needed to collect. Did the Marquis really want to introduce her to other nobles? Jake tried to calm her down, and the widow realized that she looked like she was venting her anger for no reason. She is sorry that it is Kinitsu who has to listen to this, because he is the only man who calls her by name, also adds lady and treats her with at least a little respect. The Baron himself was still trying to explain that he had been sent specifically to prepare the lady. Claire said that she visited the Lord's bedroom too often in order to not look suspicious. This greatly embarrassed the butler. She continued to joke about how she should have appeared in knightly armor when suddenly Count Schweinen burst into the office screaming. He was outraged that more than 10 clerks were sent to Zoltz. After all, this means that there will not be enough clerks in Volador to write reports and letters. Jake justified himself by saying that these people are really needed in Zoltz, and nothing can be done about it. The Count is still indignant. Tomorrow is a big holiday, and there are no people in the castle who could write important official letters. Also this damn Max who still can't learn Latin. Claire quickly realized that this man is Aaron Schweiven. He is the head of the second most influential family in Geneva after the Mohrenheits, and his son Max is the captain of the knightly order. He is so powerful that he even managed to become the son-in-law of the previous Marquise. The stories Claire has heard from other maids can be very helpful. Jake reassured the Count that the required number of clerks was already ready for the festival. There was nothing to worry about, but Schweiven did not like the quality of these clerks. Not having the strength to endure these bickering with excuses, Claire decided to intervene and asked if they were looking for a person who could translate from Latin to Frankish. The Count looked at the girl carefully and recognized her as a maid with a wounded leg. The girl was surprised. The widow explained that she could read Latin. She can also write in Latin and translate into Frankish. Perhaps that way she can help. The Count was very interested, but Jake tried to intervene, warning that Lady Claire should not get involved in these matters. Schweiven heard the girl's name and asked who she was, to which Lord Keenitz introduced the widow as a 2-room apartment from the tower. The Count was surprised that this was the Marquise's lady. This complicates the process of getting help in writing. Now Claire understood that the butler was only pretending to respect her, but in fact he was the same conservative worm as everyone else here. But she was determined and offered to dispel all doubts by testing her skills. Jake tried to be indignant, but the Count was very interested. The girl began to translate from Frankish into Latin, noting to herself that, judging by the elegant handwriting, the decision was written by the Marquis himself. The Count was surprised that the girl was actually reading a book on the history of Rochman. He thought that the maid was exaggerating her abilities, but the grammar, translation, and even handwriting were impressive. She could compete with the best scribe on the continent. But if it turns out that a commoner has excelled in literature, and even in Latin, most nobles will consider her a witch or a plague sufferer. I should have listened to Aunt Gelda and kept quiet about my abilities, because again the question arose where Claire learned this. She again made the excuse that she simply read a lot as a child, and was surprised that the Count was not angry at the fact that the woman was gifted. In any case, the translation was impressive, so Schweiven approached the girl with an offer to become a clerk. Jake appealed to prudence because if people found out, Volador would lose all authority, but the Count valued talented people more. The girl dreamed of becoming a clerk instead of the lady from the tower. On the day of departure to Langtao, a girl with blue eyes walked among the priests in black cloaks. The Marquis walked in armor and on horseback. People rejoiced at just one glance at the Lord. It seems that the Count was worried about the upcoming meeting of the Marquis with the Archduke, but this event promises great benefits, so he will have to endure. The Empire is in decline. The next emperor after Ringen has left this world, and the nobles are taking everything they can into their hands while the poor become poorer every day. Discontent is growing, and doubts about the legitimate rule of the imperial family are intensifying. Are they really the descendants of our heroic emperor? The heyday of the empire passed away with the past emperor. The Marquis, like a bolt from the blue, will lead the warriors to victory, eclipsing the radiance of the glory of his predecessor. The appearance of a talented military leader who is able to protect the country's borders will remind the inhabitants that he is not only the grandson of a renowned hero, but also Bolt Morinhites, the Great Lion. Of course, there may be opponents to this arrangement, but mostly people will support the man from the Ringen couple. Jake understood that the Count was right. Bolt's ascension to the throne was inevitable. This will happen when the Imperial Princess passes into another world, but it is not clear why Lady Claire would accompany the Marquis on such an important trip. After all, people might think that the Lord was seduced by a witch. These words amused Schwijven. The girl could really be considered a witch for her exceptional talents. In half a day, she remembered all the rules of grammar. Such a talent should not be missed. But Keenitz didn't quite like the idea of hiding Claire under the mask of a priest, but there was no other choice. In the past generation, women surpassed men in abilities, for example, Empress Bertha and Marchioness Oberta, who played a huge role in the structure of the country. All this points to the fact that Claire's talent cannot be wasted. A lot of nobles are trying to offer the Marquis their daughters, ready to jump into his bed, and this woman was able to distract him. If she gets pregnant, then you can take a winning position and leave her at court, plus her 3 children at court, so she will be afraid to betray. After all these arguments, Jake should have no doubt about the need for this woman for the Marquis. Claire wore not only a black cloak with a hood, but also the name of the priest Thomas, who sucked on the cart and invited his comrade to help himself to bread because a bumpy road lay ahead. But the girl was not hungry. She only pressed her bag harder. She was on edge. It seemed to her that all the people around were crazy for not understanding that she was not a priest, and moreover, not a man. The Count must be crazy. In the Empire, priests are even allowed to draw up official documents, despite the fact that they are conservatives who have lived their entire lives within the walls of a monastery. Having found out that she is a woman, they will never forgive this. And the Marquis is the most crazy of all for allowing all this to happen, dragging a woman to a meeting with the Archduke, keeping it a secret. Claire was carrying dye in the bag. She urgently needed to dye her hair, otherwise the regrown roots would become noticeable, but it was not clear how to do it. At night, the procession finally stopped. Bolt and Max were the first to dismount. The long trip must have been tiring. Unfortunately, the place did not have enough rooms to accommodate all the priests, so they would have to sleep in barracks. In the master's rooms, the table was laden with a variety of treats, and the Marquis was twirling a glass of wine in his hands. He has been thinking about that night for a long time. Was it really possible that a simple female provocation could turn his head so much? It was indescribable emotions, but they were as alien to him as they were frightening. Bolt was then very afraid that Claire would die by his own hands. He could kill her whenever he wanted, and this thought made the Marquis angry. A glass of wine flew into the wall. The knight burst into the room, worrying whether everything was okay, and the Lord kept thinking about the fact that he experienced the fear of loss for the first time. Morinhite's hand was dripping with either wine or blood, and he himself decided that since he could not understand his emotions, he needed to keep the woman with him for as long as possible. So he ordered the priest Thomas to be brought right away. The only thing Bolt was fully aware of was that taking Claire to the Archduke's palace, and secretly at that, was too stupid a risk. At this moment, the door opened again. The knight brought the priest. In the worst-case scenario, the Marquis would have to renounce all claims to the throne, even though they were part of the trip. The knight left the room and Bolt removed the hood from the girl's head, revealing her beautiful face. For the most part, he didn't care about the circumstances anymore. He didn't even really know why he took Claire with him, so he just pulled her towards him and kissed her. Then there were kisses on the neck. The girl tried to stop him, noticing his rewound hand, but she asked him to concentrate. The knight had just called her in front of all the priests, and then from the threshold, the Marquis so greedily pressed his lips into her. The couple could not see peace. Chase knocked on the door with papers. The man found Mr. Thomas and the priest at work, so he simply left the documents. But I still mentally noticed that this priest was somehow too small. Claire was beside herself with fear and anger. The Marquis did not let her go even though they were almost caught. After all, if she had been declassified, the Lord would have had a lot of problems, but Bolt explained that if he was afraid of this, he simply would not have taken Claire with him. However, he had never seen her so scared. He didn't think he would ever see such an expression on her face. The girl decided to ask why Bolt took her with him at all. Is it really all because someone needs to warm the Marquis's bed? But he gave her papers and asked her to translate them into Latin. The godfather praised the girl's abilities, so Morinhites wants to see for himself. While the widow was translating, the lord was reading. Out of the corner of her eye, Claire again noticed a wound on his hand and decided to find out where it came from, but quickly became embarrassed and did not participate in the ambiguous conversation. Therefore, I switched the topic to the question of why the Marquis needed to translate his travel diary. After all, not everyone knows Latin, it will be more difficult for other people to understand, and this surprised Bolt. He noted that Claire is not at all like Jake. Despite the fact that he is a nobleman, he will never contradict, while Claire, even being a commoner, is always trying to cling to something. She even tried to argue with this remark, but only confirmed to herself that she was glad to be different from a man with old-fashioned principles. Bolt explained that Jake had indulged him all his life. This is how his family raised him. He has such a defensive reaction. He is nervous about any reason and protects the master. Claire was surprised that the Marquis was now defending the honor of Baron Kienitz. Sometimes the other side of the Marquis of Morenheitz is unexpectedly revealed to her. He ruthlessly rules his domain, but now he looks guilty and responsible for the lives of other people. Everyone at birth receives what they are entitled to. They do not have the opportunity to choose what kind of life to live. That's right, because Claire didn't choose anything either. So the Marquis need not worry about the past. After what he has seen and done, he should only feel that life is too short. Just as he lived his life honestly, Baron Kienitz did the same. Bolt ran his finger over the girl's lips and then kissed her passionately. He decided that since he couldn't restrain his desires, he would at least be honest with himself, and the Marquis remained between Claire's thighs. She was trembling all over and clutching the lord's hair with her hand. It was almost impossible to tolerate this, so the girl asked to stop. Bolt raised his head and was surprised. The girl explained that the sensations were too strange. The Marquis kissed her hand, believing that there was something more hidden behind these words. The widow noted that the gentleman had never done this before, and he replied that he regretted that he had not done so. They moved to the bed, and Claire understood that tomorrow she would be tired all day again. At the same time, I tried to understand my feelings. Today they were a little different. Bolt got rid of his clothes and began to get rid of Claire's clothes. Morning came. In the courtyard, the knights were preparing to set off. Max burst into the Marquis's room. Morenheitz was getting dressed and reacted aggressively when the captain of the order entered without knocking. Max was surprised by the fact that the gentleman overslept, because he always does everything on time. But on the other hand, a soft bed will not be seen for a long time, so this makes sense. The squad will have to cross the harsh Maltese mountains. Their backs begin to ache just thinking about it. Claire woke up to the sound of voices, sleepily stretched and covered herself with the blanket. Behind the curtain, she saw the silhouettes of two men talking and realized with horror that she had fallen asleep in the Marquis's room. While she was trying to find her things, Max heard a noise and became afraid that there might be an intruder in the room. But judging by the calmness of the Marquis, he guessed that the gentleman had spent the night with a woman. Only the owner of this house had really sent her. Bolt smiled sarcastically and said that Priest Thomas was in his bed. And at first Max calmed down, not attaching any importance to this fact, and then everything dawned on him. The sun was already high when the procession arrived at the foot of the Maltese mountains. It was customary to make a halt here, having first made sure that there were no bandits nearby. The knight was convinced that no one would dare to attack the Marquis's retinue, but Max explained that there could easily be someone waiting for the absent-minded nobleman at the Puisan border. After this, the captain of the order turned to the priest Thomas, notifying him that it was possible to leave. Max told the girl that they had decided to rest in this place before moving deeper into the Maltese mountains. They will stay in the forest for several days, and since no one knows the true identity of Priest Thomas, Lady Claire cannot stray far from Max. But the girl interrupted the instructions of the captain of the order with a request to go away and wash her hair. After a while, a girl with a bunch of jars was kneeling in front of a stream. Despite the fact that the captain was cursing and indignant, Claire was glad to find this place, because the color was almost beginning to appear. She began to dye her hair so that no one would notice her upon returning to Puisan. Because of her unique hair and eye color, she had to spend her entire life on the run, not even knowing who was really pursuing her. And then Claire fell into the clutches of the most heartless man. He is cold as the Altus wind, but his touch makes her whole body burn. It's terrible why she's even thinking about this. She needs to get ready quickly. But then an arrow stuck into the ground, and after it, its owner appeared, a man in a black cloak, flashing a sword. The robber grinned and put his sword to the priest's neck, warning him not to open his mouth. Claire tried to figure out how to call the captain for help, but the bandit, as if reading thoughts, replied that the knights were already having fun with other robbers. The demon on the girl's shoulder reminded her that she had fallen into a trap again, so it was time to finally surrender to the clutches of death. After all, she always considered death to be a way out of any situation, and now no one will save her. It's better to die now than to be upset in the future, as always. Yes, to die at the hands of a bandit, even Aunt Gelda accepted such a death. No one would condemn, but Claire is desperate to accept reality and not run from it. Therefore, sand flew into the robber's eyes. A second to think, the girl thought that she could escape. But the bandit was more agile, grabbed the priest by the hand, pulling him towards him. Claire screamed when suddenly a characteristic slurping sound was heard. The robber fell to the ground and Bolt was behind him, his face distorted with fear. Still holding the bloody sword in his hand, he rushed towards the girl, trying to find out if she was okay. He shouted, trying to get an answer whether Claire was hurt. But she was silent and only thought about how the Marquis was sweating. She had never seen him breathe so heavily outside the bedroom. My head began to spin. Everything around me swam. The widow tried to curse that she had to wait too long. But suddenly, the strength completely left the subtle body, and Claire fell unconscious into the hands of the Marquis. At the edge of the forest, the blood of tied-up bandits was shed one by one. Bolt personally executed everyone with his sword, summoning one person at a time. In the end, the blue-eyed robber asked to stop. He admitted that he was the leader, and that he would pay because the others acted on his orders. Bolt calmly replied that the bandits acted on the orders of an incompetent leader, so they must pay for their misdeeds. The leader tried to justify himself by saying that they had not killed anyone. Yes, the crew had suffered, but there was no need to kill for that. Bolt was very angry, because if he had not arrived on time, the outcome would have been completely different. Max at that time asked the gentleman to control himself. After all, the priest is already under the supervision of a doctor. He said that he feels well, so we should calmly investigate the situation. Someone may be behind the attack, but the bandit leader considered these arguments to be erroneous. With tears in his eyes, he explained that they only wanted to rob the crew, but did not intend to injure or kill anyone. And the priest was captured to scare and extort money. If the blue-eyed man had known that everything would turn out this way, he would have remained sitting in the boat in the Jurassic Sea. The bandit's manner of speech sounded very familiar. In addition, the color of his hair reminded someone of someone, and his words were quite logical. The leader continued to ask the Marquis for the lives of his gang, because they are like brothers to him, offering his life in exchange for theirs. The decision was left to the Marquis. Bolt pulled his sword from its sheath. Closer to the river, the doctor treated the wound on the hand of the priest Thomas. The doctor also insisted that the cloak must be removed to examine the patient for wounds in other places. Claire, of course, was worried, but the man said that he already knew who she was. The doctor examined the girl from all sides, and also noticed that if a scar remained somewhere, Gelda would be very upset. Claire was surprised to hear her aunt's name. It turns out that the doctor was helping the woman heal wounds from thorns received as a result of a previous incident. At the moment of remembering this woman, the serious doctor became embarrassed and asked if Gelda was talking about him. Claire remembered that her aunt was always the center of attention, although she found it very annoying. The girl thought carefully and remembered that she seemed to have heard about the doctor from Gelda's lips, and the doctor broke into a happy smile. Claire at this time wondered how he managed to fall in love with his aunt, and in general, how people understand that they are in love. She had always been interested in what love was. The girl had never had it, and she did not understand what was special about it. Claire read about this in books and seemed to understand everything, but now she realizes that she is still far from understanding. The lyrical moment of thinking about love in the setting sun was interrupted by screams coming from the other side of the forest. The doctor's face became gloomy. He was about to go remove the corpses because he was convinced that the Marquis had killed every single one. Claire was not so convinced of this because this man can also be unusually soft-hearted. To be honest, even Max was surprised that the Marquis spared the lives of the remaining bandits. He appreciated the master's generosity, but still wanted to know the reasons for such an act in order to explain himself to the knights. Bolt approached the leader of the gangster community with clarification about life on the ship, and he confirmed that he had worked with the gang before on the ship. Max was trying to understand where the connection was. Was the Marquis really trying to get some information about the pirates? At this time, the doctor returned, reporting that the priest remained resting by the stream. Bolt silently went to Claire, not listening to Max's questions about what to do next with the bandits. Just like the master's silence, the captain was struck by the woman who, after her experience, decided to be alone. Yes, something strange was happening to her from the very beginning, and these thoughts prompted Max to understand the solution to the Marquis' mercy. Of course, the main bandit and that woman have obvious similarities, his brash manner of speech and even his appearance. That is the reason why Bolt left him alive. Meanwhile, the Lord himself came to the stream near which Claire was sitting. His look was a little sad, and the girl asked if Bolt had killed all the bandits. She was not indifferent to this, because in the event of their death she would like to honor their memory, because even such bad people may have families. This amazed the Marquis. Could it be that after what they did to her, this woman was thinking about such things? Claire looked into Bolt's embarrassed face. His eyes filled with compassion, and it seemed to her that he was worried about her. She explained that she only got away with a scratch, which was nothing compared to her ankle. Bolt looked at her seriously and asked if she was still offended. The girl was embarrassed and said that she didn't know. She was just irritable due to the feeling of discomfort. But I must admit, now she is much better, and besides, I wonder why the Marquis is suddenly interested in her health. Bolt approached Claire and replied that he didn't want to hurt her anymore, and then kissed her. The girl asked why this upset him, but he didn't know, so he answered the question with a question. Claire was surprised, because in the books love was described as something magical, but it seems that even such a difficult relationship can be called love, although this idea is stupid and naive. So, the Rosemontac festival in Poisson finally began. It all started with people tirelessly praying for a rich harvest, which meant the approach of spring. But when Emperor Ringen passed away, the very essence of the festival changed. The nobles who came to it boasted of luxury, which was a measure of their power. They took advantage of the value of the gifts they brought to the Archduke in order to show the power they had over him. In short, this festival has become a gathering of influential figures. The Archduke was impatient, awaiting the arrival of the Mohrenheiters, and the letter about the bandit attack did not move him. Edwin was angry because Bolt had to open the parade to show the strength of their bond. The faithful servant asked the master not to be nervous. This is the first public appearance of the Marquis after the war. The Imperial Margraves have come this far, so people will admire the strength of the Archduke. The words of strength calmed Edwin, and he turned to Brody and asked if she remembered the task assigned to her. The girl should start smiling, otherwise her father will not let her go anywhere if she sits with such a face in front of the Marquis. Today she must charm the Marquis no matter how. Her only advantage is her blonde hair like her mother's, so it's time to show her usefulness. Suddenly the servant ran to the window and began to attract the master's attention. The clatter of hooves was heard in the street, flags fluttered, and the Marquis finally arrived. The brave Red Lion arrived in Puisin. He looked terribly like his father Martel. The people rejoiced. A blonde young lady watched the procession from the balcony. The sun was setting. 4 girls were sitting in the garden at a tea table. They admired the wonderful blooms around. Everyone knows that the Archduke grew this garden especially for Lady Brody. The Archduke must value his daughter very much, but the lady herself only laughed quietly. She always felt awkward attending such gatherings. The ladies whom her father invited for her to have a tea party have gathered here. Each of them is from a very influential family. You need to make friends with them at all costs. The girls at this time were discussing the last person to arrive at the festival, the Marquis of Mohrenheitz. The ladies admired the Lord's appearance and said that they had never seen such a handsome man, who also inherited his title at such an early age. He arrived with such a small number of knights, but he had already eclipsed all previous guests. Lady Brody should be happy. After all, her husband would be such a handsome man, and the girls began to laugh. Everyone in the Empire is waiting for this wedding. It's so romantic. The grandson and granddaughter of 2 heroes will unite themselves in marriage. Lady Brody herself was in no hurry to rejoice, but rather was confused when suddenly one of the ladies pointed to 2 men behind the rose bushes. It was the Marquis with one of the knights. The Lord also noticed the ladies, so he bowed and left in a different direction. The girls continued to giggle and admire the beauty of the man they now saw up close, and Lady Brody cannot understand what feelings she is experiencing now. Will she really be happy after her wedding with the Marquis? She had never thought about marriage before. But the interlocutors turned to the girl again to find out what she thought about this. She remembered her father's words that if she did not marry the Marquis, then she would be of no use as a child. So she replied that she was also looking forward to meeting the Marquis. Night fell. Bolt was sitting in his office with documents. A knight came in to announce that the rest of the group would arrive tomorrow night. The Marquis thanked the man and dismissed him, wondering if he himself needed rest. Rubbing his eyes, Bolt looked towards Claire, who was also sorting out papers. She suddenly turned to him with a question. But at that very moment she disappeared. Since she was just a vision, the Marquis realized that he had a serious problem. A ball soon took place at Langtau Castle. The guests were in beautiful outfits. The hall was light from many bright lamps and sparkling jewelry. The Archduke greeted the assembled nobles. Lady Brodie felt out of place. Everyone around was constantly whispering about the Marquis, who had not even deigned to appear yet, this irritated Edwin. The lady looked at her father and remembered the nanny's words that this banquet could greatly change her life if she improved her relationship with the Marquis. Since the Archduchess is absent, the first dance must be between the daughter and the father. The Archduke will then conditionally hand over the lady into the hands of the Marquis. This would be a chance to seduce the Marquis, and Lady Brodie did not like this word very much. There was excitement in the hall. Everyone looked around at Bolt Morinhites, who entered the hall. The Marquis looked stunning in a black suit with gold embroidery and a long coat lined with fur. He greeted His Grace Archduke Edwin and Lady Brodie, and then he kindly took the girl's hand and kissed it, looking into the eyes of the Archduke's daughter. She was confused and still did not understand how she needed to seduce this man. In the end, she didn't even have a chance to dance with the Marquis, let alone seduce him, because at one moment he seemed to disappear into the ground. There was a noise in the hall. People were looking for the Marquis and trying to understand at what moment he had left. While Lady Brodie was dancing with her father, she saw the knight approach the lord and say something. Bolt smiled and disappeared. The Archduke was beside himself with anger. How could it be so easy to leave in the middle of a banquet? And the daughter reassured her father, assuring him that there was most likely a good reason for this. The Marquess did not return later, and surprisingly, Lady Brodie felt only relief. At this time, the remaining crew arrived at Langtau Castle. Max was simply exhausted because he convinced the Marquis to go first so as not to miss the parade. And then the carriage wheel fell off and he had to take care of the rest of the group. All this suffering should pay off with a vacation. With this thought, the gentleman himself arrived, and his first question was about Claire's whereabouts. The captain began to talk about the journey and his works, but the lord once again asked where the priest Thomas was, and left in the direction indicated by Max. The son of Count Schweiven was horrified by the gentleman's act. Apparently, he had completely lost his mind because of the woman. There was a smell of roses all around. Ever since the day the Marquis arrived, this aroma has been giving me a headache. This disgusting smell is driving you crazy, but suddenly Bolt saw a familiar silhouette. Among the bushes of hated plants stood the most beautiful woman. The thick aroma of the trees and the bitter smell of the grass, like all the other smells, he can finally inhale them all. The Marquis pressed himself against Claire's slender body with all his might, noting that she had lost a lot of weight during the trip. She tried to distance herself a little and made excuses that it was impossible to lose weight in a couple of days. The Marquis licked the girl's long fingers, pulled her towards him again. Something hard rested on Claire's thigh. The priest's cloak fell to the ground, and Bolt pressed his lips into the girl's shoulder, holding her by the waist. The priests and knights unloaded the things they had brought, while the Marquis was kissing his woman on a bench in the garden. He ploughed into her again and again, although Claire was incredibly worried that anyone would see them. Bolt assured that he would immediately sense any presence, so the girl had nothing to worry about. She just needed to relax and enjoy. However, when the gentleman went further than kissing his neck, Claire stopped him again. She explained that she was just coming from the road, so she didn't have time to wash herself. The girl looked very embarrassed with her hair disheveled and her cheeks flushed. This circumstance did not frighten the Marquis, who spent most of his time on the battlefield, so he playfully bit Claire on the finger. Bolt was so glad to finally relax that he didn't understand why this woman was always so worried. On the other hand, he was glad that she was now behaving with him consciously. Claire was surprised that he continued to touch her. Besides, she needed something stronger and more exciting, so she whispered her desire in his ear. At this time, the voice of Max was heard, who was looking for the priest Thomas. The captain of the order was surprised to meet the lord here. Claire was hiding under his cloak behind his broad back, listening to the Marquis's malicious comments about the guest who had appeared at the wrong time. But what horrified the girl most of all was what she had just whispered to the gentleman. After a while, Claire finally soaked in a warm bath and felt alive again. Bolt tried to walk her straight to the door. He behaves just like an animal. Does he really like that very thing? On the other hand, Claire also enjoys it. At first, she intended to hurt him as much as he hurt her, but instead of just using her, as time passed, she seemed to forget about her original goal. The way he touches her and the way he speaks, it seems that the Marquis truly values this woman, and even now she has allowed him to take control of her. I just wonder if everyone enjoys sex, and if all men want their woman as much as he does. There wasn't a single book about sex in the library where Claire was stolen from. Every woman in the Empire learns about sex in the same way. Noble women learn from their nannies who have children, and commoners from their mothers. Claire cannot ask Aunt Gelda about this, who is not even married, so at such moments the girl would also like to have a mother. This thought horrified her, because she had long ago decided that she lived well alone, without her parents. At this time, Max informed Bolt that since his room now belonged to the priest Thomas, he himself would spend the night with the master. Since the Marquis agreed emotionlessly, the captain realized that Bolt would again spend that night with that woman. By the way, the Lord asked if the white horse was ready, because tomorrow he was going to present a gift to Lady Brodie. Yes, today to sleep with one woman, and tomorrow to give a white horse as a gift to another. Max could not understand these noble habits. He also didn't understand whether Bolt was really going to marry Lady Brodie. The Marquis was annoyed by Max's curiosity about his affairs. The captain didn't so much want to meddle in the master's affairs as he wanted to understand many suspicious aspects. One thing that happened in the Maltese mountains speaks volumes. The Boltmorenheiters he knows wouldn't be so cruel. And on the other hand, he would not show pity for midges like them. This man has changed too much, and the reason for this can only be that woman. Bolt decided to change the subject, and said that it was time for Max to think about marriage himself. Starting tomorrow, they would attend banquets together to choose the right lady. The Marquis put his hand on his friend's shoulder and said that it was time for him to start organizing his life. Max, naturally, was not ready for such conversations and thought that Mohrenheiters had gone crazy. The Lord decided that the captain was not ready to listen seriously now, so he turned around and was about to leave, but Max stopped him and asked him to think about the words he had said about that woman. At this time, Claire was sleeping sweetly in a soft bed. Bolt walked into the room, remembering Max's words about how he had been behaving out of character lately. But he can cut off the head of each of those bandits at any time and will marry Lady Brodie if it is beneficial. And he always takes what he wants, and if he gets tired of something, he can easily get rid of it. He does everything based on his feelings, so he lay down next to Claire. Morning came, Lady Brodie was walking in the garden. Her health was excellent as always. It was fine weather for a walk, and since the Marquis disappeared during the ball, the nanny had not taken her eyes off her. She probably thinks the lady is fine, so she constantly asks about the lady's well-being. Brodie was still worried that her father would be angry. He was so indifferent to blood relatives. What if he considers her completely useless and exiles her, as happened with her mother? The lady does not want such a fate. Brodie was pulled out of his sad thoughts by the nanny's surprise. She noticed in the distance the figure of a man on a horse. The Marquis himself arrived to the lady. He looked irresistible. The man was wearing a wonderful suit. Brodie said that animals were not allowed in the garden. Mohrenheitz knew this, but he wanted to present the gift in person. In this empire, dresses and diamonds are a suitable gift for a lady, and he gives a white horse. The Marquis does not follow the rules dictated by society. Maybe with him you can also become free. Later, the Marquis sat in the study with the rest of the nobles, discussing the damage the pirates had caused to the Puisin ships, and it was then Bolt who was responsible for security. Therefore, he is very interested in what the Viscount Baron is trying to say. The truth is that pirates are becoming more powerful every day. We can't turn a blind eye to the dealings of these bastards who don't even know where they come from. This is the truth, and who knows, maybe the Genevan ships will be next. Without a doubt, one day they will be able to threaten the security of the entire empire. The captains of the Puisin knighthood and navy are in fact useless idiots who only got their positions thanks to the Archduke's bloodline. So Edwin suggested that the Marquis train the Puisin army personally. Bolt met Claire in the library. She heard how the master received the order to go to battle. Was the Marquis really going to fight the pirates? She thought that the Genevan knights did not have the proper experience in sea battles. It's not that she doubts the Lord, but she heard that the leader of the pirates is called the King of the Pirates. Even someone like Mohrenheiters can stumble and lose. Bolt confidently replied that the one who enjoys the battle always wins. That's the whole secret of the great warrior's victories. The Marquis came closer to the girl. He took her chin and said that there are only two paths that can lead to the knowledge of his legendary sword. Bolt will either become the best warrior of the Empire or a complete madman. The sword is thirsty for blood. Such bloodlust reminds him of Claire. Bolt came even closer and licked the woman's neck. He pulled her towards him. Her thin legs began to shake. But at that moment, Max entered the library. Claire quickly pulled up her hood, and the Marquis threatened the captain with death because he ordered no one to enter. But the reason was good. Lady Brodie entered the room apologizing for interrupting the Marquis's rest. The Lord apologized for being rude, because he acted rudely because he didn't know she was here. Brodie herself apologized for the sudden intrusion, but she had heard that the Marquis was going to the Puisin border in the Jurassic Sea, so she embroidered a scarf with the hope that he would return safe and sound. Bolt accepted the gift, saying that he would protect it like the apple of his eye. Claire looked closely at Lady Brody. Now she could see why everyone idolized her so much and believed that she would become the next Marchioness. She is so charming and elegant, it is no wonder that she is the very blessed daughter of that same Archduke. Claire was incredibly embarrassed. Max even noticed that the widow looked so confused today. Probably the fact is that the difference in the appearance of the girls is obvious. Lady Brody at this time said that some members of the Morinhites group were still huddled in barracks due to a lack of rooms, so she was ready to offer Langthew Monastery. Max said that they already had allocated rooms, but they could not stay in the monastery because of their profession. The lady apologized for such a rash proposal. At that time, the maid went and was called by the mistress of the castle. Brody suggested using the large wardrobe in the basement to find a new outfit for the priest, because his cloak was large and uncomfortable. The men unanimously thanked the lady for her generosity, but refused the offer. Claire understood that Lady Brody had no bad intentions, but the last thing she wanted was to feel pity from her specifically. The lady was desperately trying to be helpful, but it was too difficult for her to comprehend what it was like to be the recipient of all this endless generosity. At this time, other nobles were discussing whether they could trust the Marquis. He may be the leader among the Margraves, but he had no experience in naval battles. Here the Archduke intervened, reporting that there could be an incalculable number of pirates on the sea route. The Marquis explained that the proposed strategy would not work if at least one ship was damaged. After all, it was rare to meet an animal that would attack one that was larger than itself. Edwin decided that since the nobles themselves entrusted the Marquis with solving the problem, there was no point in worrying about what might happen. If everything goes well, then everyone will win, but otherwise Bolt's failure can be used against him to finally bring him under his thumb. A new day came. Priest Thomas moved silently along the corridor, clutching the treasured key to Lady Brody's personal wardrobe to his heart. While cleaning, the maids discussed the upcoming wedding of the lady and the Marquis. It was not clear why he was taking the risk and going to sea. It is rare to find a bride like Lady Brody. She is the highest-ranking noblewoman in the Empire. They will make the most beautiful couple in history, just like Emperor Ringen and Empress Bertha. Claire listened to these conversations and understood that despite her status, that very place did not belong to a noblewoman. After all, if the Marquis has already fallen head over heels in love, why doesn't he leave the library at all? Max learned of Bolt's plans and was simply amazed that they would have to cope with the pirates with only one ship. If he was going to pull this off, why didn't they provide the Teutonic Order of Knights? Unlike the Morinhiters, they have experience in naval battles. Regardless of how talented the Marquis is, doesn't he think that the war against pirates is not in line with his skills? He also only took 100 knights with him, so Max is annoyed that he is stuck here with such a nightmare master. At this time, Bolt opened the map to show a diagram of the ocean. Marked in red are points where the currents change their directions, probably when changes in tides occur. The currents are so strong that they create eddies that can capsize ships. So the challenge is to squeeze the pirates into these areas so they can be eliminated in one fell swoop. Max was interested in where Bolt learned this information. It could only be known to those who have lived here almost their entire lives. The Marquis explained that the bandit had given it all away. They were now on their way to Langthew with that man, so they would join a little later. The Knights of Morinhites learned this information from the robbers. Max was shocked. He also couldn't believe that Bolt would act so emotionally just because of a woman. So he was right that there was something else behind this action. But is Bolt really sure that the pirates will fall into their trap? The Marquis explained that all monsters could not resist taking the bait, even knowing that it could be dangerous. The more confident a predator is, the more tempted he is to fall into a trap. This is an uncontrollable instinct. All these thoughts led Bolt himself into a dead end of thoughts about Claire. The woman herself was at that moment in the wardrobe, which had previously been used as a warehouse. There should be plenty of things here. Lady Brody is a noblewoman. I wonder why this concern about an ordinary priest. Things could change if Claire refuses her kindness, so she'll just take one outfit and leave. Every single one is made of expensive fabric and embedded with diamonds. It was as if all the highest taxes collected from people from all territories were gathered right here. Here she is, the daughter of the Archduke, dressing up in these outfits and hanging herself with stones like a peacock, trying to seduce the Marquis, and all in order to take the place of the princess, which is empty to this day. On the one hand, a naive lady who loves luxury, and on the other, a Marquis who is obsessed with bloodlust and women, and people believe that they will repeat the fate of Emperor Ringen and Empress Bertha. Don't they know how the Empress died? After the Emperor died of illness, the Archduke, who was crazy about his father's wife, tried to dishonor her. The Empress tried to escape but was caught. Then she decided to pay with her life in the name of her reputation. How can people call the Archduke's daughter the most incomparable lady? It's time to think about the image and leave here. Now she realizes how much she misses Aunt Gelda. At that moment, the Marquis entered the dressing room. He instantly found himself next to Claire and put his arm around her waist. He said that he couldn't find the girl for a long time because she wasn't where Max told her to look. The Marquis pressed her to him, but Claire resisted because she did not want to do this here. Then Bolt looked into her eyes and gently kissed her hand like a real lady. He also asked her to swear on honor that she was now telling the truth. The Marquis laid Claire on the table and kissed her for a long time. Quiet moans were heard in the dressing room. Suddenly, a strange canvas fell on the couple, who were in a passionate kiss. They got out from under the fabric to see where it had fallen from, and Claire saw a stunningly beautiful dress. She froze in admiration, and Bolt asked if she would like to try it on, but the girl was convinced that such a dress would only suit such an elegant lady as Lady Brody. It would not suit an ordinary maid like her, but the Marquise did not agree with this. It doesn't matter whether Claire is a servant or not. It doesn't change the fact that she is a Bolt Morenheit's woman. There is not a single thing in the world that does not suit her, and no one can shame her for anything. If she wants something, he will get it. And even if she still voluntarily wants to be a maid, so stop resisting. It's time to put on a dress before the Marquis himself puts it on the girl. So, after some manipulation, Claire came out in a new outfit, and Bolt couldn't take his eyes off her. The turquoise color and precious stones emphasized the unusual color of the girl's eyes, and the lace looked great on her thin body. She stood embarrassed by the unusual outfit, and Bolt silently admired her beauty. In the end, he pulled himself together and said that it suits her very well. He also asked not to show this side of himself to anyone else, or Bolt would be worried about leaving her. Still, Claire wondered what would happen if she did show. The Marquis kissed the girl, smiled and said that he would gouge that bastard's eyes right out of their sockets. In the morning, Priest Thomas was already sitting on a bench in the park and reading while the birds chirped. This morning, the Marquis gathered the warriors and went to the Jurassic Sea. No one knows how long the battle will last. He left her a book with pictures of the blonde emperor so that she would be a good girl. The Marquis has been surprisingly kind lately, even yesterday. He said that the dress suited her very well and that she was the most beautiful woman in the world. This book is very rare, so I need to quickly read it while I have the opportunity. But for some reason, I can't concentrate at all. Lately, she has been relaxing too much and becoming distracted when she is not working. Claire was about to return and find something to do when she suddenly saw a man who was terrifying. The Archduke came here specifically for the man with blue eyes. Edwin was warned that the blue-eyed girl lived in the outbuilding and therefore belonged to the Marquis, but he still wanted to look at the hair, so he ordered the knights to take off the priest's cloak. Claire resisted, trying to convince the Archduke that she was a man, and Edwin was not embarrassed by this, as long as her hair was red. The Archduke had almost taken off his cloak, when suddenly a loud voice warned the Lord that he should not do this. The doctor blocked Claire with his body and said that this priest was sick with the plague, so he needs to be isolated as soon as possible, but the Archduke and his retinue quickly went in the other direction. Once safe, the doctor asked Claire how she was feeling. The girl was beside herself with horror. She was trembling all over and could not utter a word. At this time, the Marquis's ship was cutting through the waves of the ocean and the current was intensifying. The leader of the bandits informed the Lord that they had arrived at the same place. Bolt was pleased. It all looked like a good place for a grave. Max and the Marquis looked at the map, and the blue-eyed man confirmed that pirates appeared in this place more often than usual. This area is too close to land because the ocean is clear. If a ship sinks there, there will be no way back, so pirates choose this area for robbery. If a person falls overboard, he can survive, although this is too human for pirates. Yes, the nobles stole their properties, wealth and even families to cover up their losses. It is ironic that the pirates show unnecessary and misplaced compassion. The gang leader plucked up courage and asked the Marquis if the plan worked, would he allow his friends and their families to live in Geneva? And even if the blue-eyed robber dies in this war, he still asks to keep this promise. Bolt grinned and said that no one would have to fight, because they would run away. A white embroidered scarf flew into the air under the surprised glances of the crew. A ship was seen on the left. 10 ships. One of the knights was wondering whether it was worth continuing in this direction. Max confidently answered in the affirmative. We need to give more sailors to the sails in order to ride the wind when the time comes. Many knights ran along the deck to take positions, but the bandit said that he had never seen so many ships. Bolt wonders if this is something abnormal and supernatural, and the robber explained that he had never seen more than 5 ships in this place. The Marquis and his friend were not at all frightened by this. They continued to joke sarcastic jokes with each other, and then decided to look at the flag. A grey Grim Reaper on a black background. They destroy everything in their path, even if they have to sacrifice their loot. They are the most dangerous, the most bloodthirsty of the pirates. But it seems that instead of these conversations, the ship's crew needs to speed up. A boarding chain flew towards the noble ship. Some closed their eyes in horror, realizing that they were doomed, when suddenly a legendary sword flashed in the air. With one blow, Bolt Morenheitz cut the chain, thereby saving the lives of several sailors. It was impossible to cut this sharp hook in half with such ease, but in the hands of the legendary warrior was the legendary sword of Ascaron. The bandit only now realized that the nobles were not joking then. The pirates continue to pursue the ship with zeal, which means they have not yet realized that it is a trap. No, they still understood, but the bait is too sweet. From the very beginning there was no reason to be nervous, because the Marquis of Morenheitz and the Margraves were on the side of this ship. Bolt gave the command to Max, who had been waiting for this moment for a long time. A call signal sounded at the top of the mast. The bandit was terrified, because they had not yet reached the ambush site. But Max convincingly asked him not to doubt the best warrior of the Empire, because he has a plan. Ships with the coat of arms of the Archduke appeared in the distance. The robber did not understand what was happening at all. Last night the plan had to be changed. For this purpose the Archduke was visited by Max and Bolt. The Marquis explained his late visit by saying that there was a rat among the Archduke's knights. The Puisan army may be weak, but it has superiority in numbers and ammunition, but loses to surprise attacks. So the Marquis is ready to catch the rat as a gift to the Archduke. One of the knights tried to make the master doubt about this idea, but he angered Edwin and received a glass of wine in the eye. But the Archduke understood that he was providing support to the Marquis, not because he liked him. Bolt Morenheitz himself, with the legendary sword in his hands, was ready for battle. A bound man in a black suit was thrown at the Archduke's feet. He struggled and tried to say that they had no right, but Bolt smiled and replied that rats were not given words. Captain Xavier turned out to be a traitor. The Archduke had all the evidence in his hands and Edwin was furious. The available documents clearly demonstrate everything that Martin did for a long time. The captain tried to justify himself, but suddenly his speech was interrupted by a characteristic clucking sound. It seemed time to interrupt the gift-giving ceremony. After the blood was shed, the Marquis asked the Archduke not to delay the presentation of the return gift. Edwin was still annoyed that Bolt was right and was able to corner him. Already in the evening, Max told Claire about how the adventure went. Xavier's entire family, for example, would be seriously punished. It seems that at this rate the streets will soon be filled with blood, but it will not be possible to watch the performance, since tomorrow we need to go back. Information has been received about the need for reinforcements from the Lapus Mountains. Apparently, the invasion of the bastards from Milabo has become an annual event, so half the knights and marquises will join the fight immediately. And Max, Claire and the rest of the knights will return to Geneva, by the way. The reason why the captain invited the girl for a walk was finally revealed. The Marquis stood opposite Claire in a dazzling white shirt. Max hurried away. Bolt had arranged for this place to be with the girl, so he quickly pulled her towards him. He presented her with a red rose and said that it seemed that Claire remained indifferent to the past festival. The Marquise tucked a flower into Claire's hair, although she believed that such things did not suit her. Bolt agreed with her. Roses really didn't suit her, but he kissed her tenderly anyway. She would like something more charming and lightly scented, something that makes her feel comfortable, like wild flowers from the fields of the Altas Mountains that grow in the wind. The creaking of furniture was heard in the garden. Bolt leaned on Claire, but she asked to stop, as she was in pain. He was very angry that he would have to leave his girlfriend because of the damn bastards from Milabo. Bolt whispered in Claire's ear to go back to Volador and wait for him there, and she also needed to be a good girl and not get into trouble. On the other hand, it was so stupid to ask her to wait when he had forced her to do it countless times. She still obeys him in everything to this day anyway. I wonder if there was one moment when she really waited for him. And now the Marquis asks Claire about this again, because he can no longer imagine himself without this woman, in that tower and on his side. So he pressed her harder and asked her to be obedient like now, then he would give her an appropriate reward. It's a meaningless promise Bolt will keep repeating if she stays by his side. A few days later, at Volador's castle, Jake greeted Max and the captain asked how the butler was doing. Keenitz replied that they were one step away from war. He himself did not sleep for 3 days in order to have time to prepare all the requested supplies. Jake invited Max to look at the supplies, but he suggested reading the document he had brought first. It was a letter that spoke of a man who had shown that he could achieve great things. Therefore, in the order, the Marquis appoints Claire as clerk of the castle of Volador. During a halt in the mountains of La Paz, the horses rested peacefully and a fire burned between the tents. In the main tent, Bolt, Max and Julian discussed the future plan of action in front of the map. The captain did not agree with Crom's opinion because the knights were exhausted from constant fighting, but it was impossible to predict the enemy's next step. The Marquis watched this argument in silence, and then simply suggested burning everyone to the ground so that this tired war would end. Although Julian was not entirely sure who said it, the Marquis or the captain. Bolt loves to fight so much that death itself trembles in fear at the sight of him, so he could hardly use the word sick and tired to describe war. It also seemed to Julian that the Marquis was missing Geneva, since they had been away from home for several weeks. But Bolt only noticed that the sky was damn bright blue today, just like the eyes of the girl who was also looking out the window at that moment. Claire was engrossed in her work, but was distracted by a tickling sense of déjà vu as she stood at the top of the tower with the Marquis. Now she remembers the moments and realizes how much time has passed since the moment the Marquis went to the mountains. Maybe he too is now admiring the sky as then. Claire was pulled out of her thoughts by an irritated voice, which was clearly calling her not for the first time. The Count brought another bunch of documents and asked the girl to concentrate in order to finish the work on time. Claire tried to resist, because such a volume of work would drive her to the grave, but Schwijven said that she just needed to translate it all from Frankish to Latin. These are requests for donations. Letters will be sent to high-ranking nobles of the Empire. But these are not simple letters. The entire Empire is swept by rumors about the lack of progress in the relationship between the Marquis and Lady Brodie. Therefore, every family where there is a daughter was visited by a feeling of hope. Everyone will instantly respond as soon as they receive the letter. They donate money in order to bribe the Marquis, which is exactly how the world of aristocracy works. Claire decided to clarify whether the Lord was also interested in getting married soon, and the Count suspected the girl of jealousy. Schwijven asked Claire not to have false hopes and to serve the future Marquise as faithfully as she now serves the Marquis. But the girl was not sure that she would deserve any special treatment from the Lord, which irritated the Count. He explained that the heir's tower was built by the first Marquis of Newburgh, and this is not a place where the first person he meets is allowed to stay. So she should be grateful to Bolt for his kindness, and she has the opportunity to give the most beautiful gift a man can receive. It's amazing that for 3 times she couldn't realize it. She needed to give birth to a child for the Marquise. And while Claire was looking for words to respond to such impudence, a sailor walked in the harbor with a barrel on his shoulder. He saw among the cargo a white scarf with embroidery. It seems that this thing is not cheap. He needs to give it to Claire. The young man bent down to get it. Another worker noticed this action and ordered to stop, and then the barrel rolled. He began to shout that this was his product and took the young man by the collar. But the man with ashen hair could stand up for himself. The sailor flew off in the other direction. The young man said that he was going to do everything he wanted to do on his last day here, because Endine was heading to meet his little sister. Claire walked through the winter forest. On such a night the Count forced her to work late. It seems that he really wants to bring her to the grave. The girl has been working as a clerk for 6 months now, but her work is not getting any less, and if you think about it, you can't say that she likes it. However, she learned a lot from this work and is now able to voice her thoughts. Now she finally feels alive. But this was not the time to fantasize. She had to rush home in time to wish the children good night. Suddenly her legs began to slip, and the girl fell head over heels. A stream was waiting ahead of her, and if she fell into it, she would certainly not get away with slight frostbite. Of course, at that moment she was saved by a beautiful knight, who again found himself in the right place at the right time. The Archduke at this time was torn and angry because the negotiations had just begun, and the Marquis had already left. He instructed his captain to conduct negotiations on his own and left somewhere. Edwin was angry because immediately after the naval battle, he had to marry the Marquis and his daughter. One of the counts suggested sending a letter to Volador because preparations for the banquet in honor of the victory had already begun, so Bolt should be present in any case. However, this plan will not work, since movement around Altus is very difficult in winter. In addition, negotiations with La Paz have not yet ended, so calling Bolt under the pretext of a banquet will only anger Bolt, and there is also the risk of undermining the Archduke's situation. Edwin shouted that he needed to send gifts to the Marquis, sparing no expense, to break into pieces, but to do everything in order to get closer to Bolt before next spring. With the beginning of spring, they must be husband and wife, for if Lady Brodie enters the Morenheit's house, Edwin's grandson will inherit the great title. And since the Archduke can use the power of Bolt and the people's love for his grandson, He will be able to wield power that cannot be compared with the power of the current emperor. This means that Edwin will not have to wait for his own brother to die. At this time, Bolt was lighting the fireplace to warm Claire up. She said that she did not expect the Marquis to return so soon. The Lord explained that he did not inform anyone about his return. He pressed himself against the girl, and she noticed that he was completely wet and cold. It turned out that he swam right in that stream and then gave Claire his cloak. The girl said that he should still wash his hair. He just needs to find something to dry it with. However, Bolt quickly grabbed Claire by the waist and pulled her towards him. He again inquired about the girl's well-being, the condition of her leg, and she said that everything was fine. The Marquis suggested that the next time she rolled down the slope, she should spread her legs to slow down, otherwise she would break her skull. After making sure that Claire was okay, he leaned on her so that they could fall asleep together. Closing his eyes, he inhaled this aroma, which is why the war seemed so unusually long. Surrounded by the smell of blood, he continued to remember the aroma emanating from this woman. Within minutes, Claire could only hear the sniffling of a large body nearby. Now that she thought about it, she realized that she had always been the one to lose her temper first. And now Claire sees him just sleeping peacefully, remembering that Mr. Bolt was once a boy. When Mrs. Ravia told her this, the picture did not emerge in her head, but when she sees him like this, she seems to understand what the nanny wanted to say. The next day, many carriages filled the entire courtyard of the castle. Everyone was fussing around, and Bolt and Jake were trying to understand how many gifts the Archduke had sent. It was also interesting that he chose most of them himself. Most likely all this is connected with Lapis. He was so sad that he could only send gifts, so he chose everything with trepidation. This was reported by the arriving Viscount Baron as the person responsible for the transportation of gifts, so the Archduke is expecting rather payment for his kindness. Lady Brodie's riding skills are getting better every day, and she can't wait to show off her skills in person. Leaving, Bolt wished the Viscount a good rest before his imminent departure, which greatly offended the Baron. Count Schwaven expressed his irritation at the Archduke's handouts, as if the Marquis had already become his precious son-in-law. Bolt didn't pay attention to these arguments. He didn't care what Edwin thought. The Count insisted that the Archduke was asking everyone about the wedding, and soon rumors would spread throughout the Empire. Bolt said that he was able to push his accomplices into the headquarters of the Puisan army. 6 months later, immediately after the destruction of the pirates, one traitor was brought to my lord. He justified himself by saying that he supplied certain information only in order to cover his son's gambling debts. And then they began to blackmail him that if he stops doing this, the information will reach the Archduke. But the Marquis interrupted the plaintive speeches of Count Redford. Having shown mercy to the desperate man, the Lord acquired an ally in him in order to keep the Archduke at bay. The Count, after listening to this story, reminded Bolt that it was time to officially introduce the mistress of the clan. If this news spreads throughout the area, the Archduke's reputation will fall through the roof, and then he will stop playing these games. Also, Claire is a smart girl, so she will be useful to the Marquis if he continues to keep her with him. So it would be nice to present her in this status, but Bolt did not want to get involved in meaningless feuds. However, the Marquis still wondered how Claire herself would react if she heard such a proposal. At this time, at the other end of the castle, the girl received instructions to monitor the Marquis's bedroom. The maid reported that this was an order from Baron Kienitz himself. It turned out that the reason for this was Claire's comment about mold last time. The butler was impressed and decided that the room needed supervision. The girl tried to refuse, but the maid convinced her that only she could cope with this task. And besides, everything in the castle became much better with the appearance of Claire. She had a lot of things to do lately, and people began to ask her what she thought about this or that issue, but she used to be the lady from the tower. But do influential people really consult with her just because she is a Marquis's woman? No, this cannot be. It is because she can read and write, and also think critically. And she also understands that they all need it. Wherever the girl goes, no one will stop her. But Claire is interested in the question of what will happen when the Marquis brings another woman into this bedroom. She had not seen the Lord since that day. Without the warmth of the fireplace and his cloak, it might have seemed like it was all just a dream. Since that day, he never went to look for her. Perhaps he has already found a replacement, or is really going to get married. This is even stupid. The fear of losing the meager power that she now has. Claire has already felt the pleasure of the meager power that she has gained. Why is she still not aware of her place and cannot put up with the life she deserves? She just needs to please the Marquis and maintain his interest in her person. At this time, the very object of Claire's thoughts and the owner of the room appeared at the door. He sarcastically remarked that being here at such a time was too bold. Claire apologized for entering the room without permission. She was only here to check the condition of the room. He quickly walked up to the girl, leaned over and said that he did not expect such enthusiasm. The widow pressed herself into the sofa, maybe because the memories popped up in her head only seconds ago. Now she was uncomfortable. She explained that the task of checking the room was given to her by Baron Kinitz, and the Marquis noticed that his woman was strewn with many different obligations. Claire was embarrassed, looked away, and said that it all happened by accident. The Marquis asked if she was decorating this room, and she replied that she was only compiling a list. The merchants did the rest. Bolt stroked the girl's face and asked her to remember that he loves bright colors. They are delightful, especially blue. Claire needs to keep this information in her head. At that time, she realized that there were only a mere couple of months left before the arrival of spring, and then her presence here would be in question. The true mistress of the castle will arrive very soon, not a fake like Claire, but the one who can turn this beast into a truly influential figure, the real mistress. So now it costs him nothing to throw the lady out of the tower. The next day, Claire was with the Count in the library. They discussed letters and today's agenda. Schwaven said that the girl should learn to take responsibility when required because she comes up with good ideas. She objected, saying that this was just the idea of an ordinary worthless maid, but she liked the Count's care. Schwaven saw that behind these speeches there was supposedly hidden modesty, but in fact there was arrogance. Her abilities and talents faded over time only because she was born a commoner, so the Count suggested that the girl think about her adoptive father. And if the surname Schwaven does not suit her, then he could find another one that suits her talents, so it would be easier to gain a foothold at court than being just a marquise's woman. The Count believes that Lady Brody is not suitable for the role of Volador's mistress, so they should have someone to play the role of at least an unofficial mistress. Claire sat more gloomily than a cloud because she believed that the Marquis himself wanted to get married, but Schwaven called this idea stupid, and besides, he did not want the girl to waste her talents. It is possible that Claire's life would be better if she acquired the status of a mistress instead of the one who warms the Marquis's bed whenever he wishes. Later, the girl in the forest got up on her skis and thought about this proposal from the Count. He presented everything as if he was worried about her, as if he was so good and kind, but in reality he wanted to keep her around to satisfy his base desires. You just need to forget and let go. The widow could not appear in front of the children in such a mood, especially today when she returns home and they are still awake. In addition, Claire now has amazing snowshoes, which she borrowed from other servants. Walking on them is very refreshing. The girl felt free. Already near the destination, the girl noticed a dark silhouette under a tree. Claire quickly rushed past the Marquis, snow flying at him from under her snowshoes. After a short conversation about the Count's proposal, Bolt noticed that the girl had become more arrogant since their last meeting. She apologized and said that she did not intend to offend the gentleman. He also saw deceit in this. Claire made her tone even more serious and asked if the Marquis would like her to thank him for this offer of the status of the official mistress of the castle. She feigned words of gratitude, and Bolt laughed cheerfully, noting that the girl remained the same. It was the first time Claire had seen such a sincere laugh from the Marquis, and at that time he took her hand and suggested that she quickly follow him if she, of course, did not want to be eaten. After some time, they were already sitting in the tower. The Marquis handed the girl a flask. She sniffed the liquid. Most likely it contained alcohol. Bolt was clearly tired, so he put his head on the girl's shoulder and closed his eyes. Lately, he has been acting so strangely. He put her in the tower again. Although the house was already 2 steps away, he began to give her alcohol and use her as a pillow. Claire wondered if maybe she really should have a drink, and Bolt, in a half-asleep voice, asked the girl to take a torch with her next time for a walk in the forest. Quite a few wolves have been spotted in the area. The Marquis enjoyed watching them as a child. Wolves rarely go to the mountains, but there are arrogant ones, so you should be on your guard. Claire was not too surprised by the Lord's knowledge, because it is not for nothing that he is called a great hunter. The girl recalled the nanny's stories about the Marquis's childhood, when he was a completely different person. He had sweet cheeks and was very naughty, an ordinary boy like everyone else. But it seems that only Mrs. Ravia could call him an ordinary boy. It is unlikely that anyone else could call him that. Bolt was still lying on the girl's shoulder at this time, but had already opened his eyes. He again seriously asked Claire if she refused to become the mistress of the castle. With such a status, she will not occupy power. Maybe she should not neglect this proposal, but Claire answered that she accepted the tower and the house only because he insisted. And when the Lord no longer needs it, he will simply throw it away. Bolt took the flask and took a sip, and then said that despite these fears she was still here, and judging by rumors, she liked the work of a clerk. Lately, the Marquis began to notice the handwriting of this woman in every work. In every document of the Morinhites, they are all full of directness and gratitude. And everything is decorated in ornate handwriting, which symbolizes the character of the clerk. She is everywhere. She reminds of herself everywhere. And now she behaves as if she means nothing. Claire said that she should not be embarrassed by her refusal. She still had no choice, because she must obey any word of the master. The Marquis at first consciously kept his distance. He really didn't want her to become like anyone else who took the name Morinhites, having gained even a drop of power. Even though he knew that she was different, he could not trust simply because she was not like everyone else. So the Marquis remained aloof. And yet he does not like the way the widow rejects him, so adamantly and with a determined look. Bolt was glad that the girl was so obedient, but still not worth it. He will choose a suitable family for her. You just need to choose a family that you like. There is no need to waste such talent in the position of mistress. Claire pushed the Marquis away and said that she did not want to become the mistress of any house at all. Moreover, there is no need to give such a title and belonging to his own family to a woman who he needs only when he wants her and who cannot refuse. Bolt replied that she was right. Claire does not behave like a typical lover, so she does not deserve all this, but the more she says, the harder it is for the Marquis to say goodbye to her. She needs to be smart, smile and flirt, driving the master crazy, and maybe he will lay the empire at her feet because the Marquis can be soft-hearted and cannot resist this woman. She should use this instead of showing how unhappy she is with what the Marquis gave her and continues to give her. Then maybe things will become much more interesting. The words about an empire laid at one's feet interested Claire. Bolt never thought she would ever say something so ridiculous. What matters in this case is whether Claire can put to use the power she will gain if he actually does this. She replied that such a prerogative is clearly better than having your life depend on someone else, and will continue to do so for the rest of the time. Claire did not want to become famous as the mistress of the castle, who does nothing but share her bed with her master. Bolt was turned on by this game, especially when the girl sat on him. She explained that choosing between the life of a maid is different from bearing someone else's name, which will cover her own, and living as a mistress for the rest of her days. So Claire wants to at least have freedom of choice, because without it, her life will become even more monstrous. If necessary, she will behave like a seductress, but then she wants to continue to live that way. Bolt thought about it and asked why he should meet her halfway if she behaves so arrogantly, forgetting her place. Claire ran her hand over the Marquis's cheek and replied that he still wouldn't be able to let her go right now. That is why he indulges her desires and behaves arrogantly, while at the same time pointing out that she has forgotten her place. And if the Marquis continues to press, then who knows, maybe she will be eaten by wolves or found somewhere with a broken neck. Claire understood perfectly well that Bolt was now very afraid of losing her, and this was where her power and confidence lay. So the firewood crackled in the room and the bed creaked again. The Marquis wanted to see the face of his seductress, but she again hid her eyes in shame. His intense and frank gaze weighs on Claire to this day. In the past, she would have felt helpless and weak in front of this gaze. But now she is not afraid of him. Now she can look him straight in the eyes. Bolt liked it when Claire looked at him, as long as he had her. Let him do everything to make him want her even more. The girl did not understand what he was trying to achieve. If he continued to behave so openly depraved, she would simply have to use him. Claire looked at him seriously and pushed him onto the pillows. The girl was sitting on top of the Marquis. He was surprised and interested in what would happen next. She removed his hands and asked him to lie down and not move. Claire was going to be the lover he wants, so she has already entered into the role and hopes that the Marquis will withstand such intensity of passions. Bolt clenched his teeth, a vein bulged in his neck, and sweat ran down his face. After this, Claire made him promise that he would leave her alone. But the Marquis noticed that for now, she herself was coming into his hands. She pressed herself close to him and said that if he wanted it that way, then so be it. Yes, Claire believed that it should be so if this was an order. The next morning, the girl was already sitting in her office at work. She straightened her hair. There was a hickey on her neck from last night, which she had to cover with her hand when the Count entered the room. But he still noticed and got angry because he didn't understand why she still refused the status of mistress. Then there was a conversation about a possible pregnancy, and this was beyond Claire's strength. She quickly got up and ran away, supposedly to get some ink. In the corridor, she met the Marquis, who sarcastically asked if she was really shirking work. Claire explained that she just needed to get a jar of ink, but Bolt led her into the office. The door clicked shut. The Marquis approached the girl, hugged her from behind, and asked if she wanted to start pestering him here. But at that moment, there was a knock on the door. It was Julian. He said that the informant had arrived. Bolt irritably replied that he would decide everything later, and Claire didn't like that. She tried to persuade the Marquis to go and take care of business, because it might be something urgent, but he whispered in her ear that he only had one urgent matter here. And if she did not understand, the Lord decided to clarify that it was Claire who was this urgent matter. She promised to give herself completely, and in return he would not keep her in this hated castle. It was true, but Claire had given herself so much all last night. Was it really not enough for him? The Marquis released the girl and went to the desk drawer, and then called her. In his hands he held a jar of ink. It seems that this amount should be enough. Bolt handed the widow the ink, kissed her ear, and said that he would be in the tower before dawn, so it was better for her to wait for him. When Claire left the office, she noticed Julian. She told herself that she should not be ashamed. In any case, she knew what she was getting into, and she knew the pay and value of this status. If the Marquis gives the opportunity to be the lady of the tower instead of the mistress, she will have to give him what he wants. And one of the taverns was very noisy. People were discussing the latest rumors. The Marquis brought a woman to Volador Castle, and what's more, she was a widow with 3 children. They also say that he decorated the tower to her taste, as luxuriously as the castle, and also gave her this very tower. This conversation interested the fair-haired man. He heard that the Marquis was going to marry the daughter of Edwin Ringen, and this man brought a widow to the castle. The others considered him impudent for his ignorance, but he made the excuse that he had recently arrived in Geneva. People still believed that only the Archduke was interested in the wedding. The Marquis himself did not even look at the lady, but the blue-eyed young man said that Morinhites even started a war with the pirates for the sake of Edwin. But people again objected, insisting that the Marquis was simply showing the strength of his army, but Endine no longer wanted to discuss this. He was more worried about the fate of the widow. Why does the Marquis bother with her? Since she has 3 children, she must be old. But one of the men objected. His wife works in that castle and said that that woman was young enough. They also say that she is very beautiful, especially her blue eyes. People around again began to admire the Marquis, even his taste in women. Endine left the tavern and believed that Jenna was pregnant before he left, and if the children were taken care of properly, there should be 3 of them. Also blue eyes. It seems they were really talking about Claire. What did she get herself into this time? At that time, the children were lying at home with a cold, of course. The mother rushed in as quickly as she could. Aunt Gelda was worried that Claire had to take time off from work, but the girl explained that she could not do otherwise. She also brought a doctor who touched Luca's forehead and concluded that the boy had a high fever. Finn also has a fever. Most likely it is a cold. Many guys are sick now. Aunt Gelda asked Claire not to go near the children. God forbid she would get sick too, so it was better to stay away so as not to catch a cold. The doctor said that Gelda was fine, but to be careful just in case. At this time, the nanny came with Rudia. Mrs. Ravia decided that it was better for the baby to stay in the castle for now. Claire wanted to take the girl for herself, but the nanny said that only those who have permission can get inside the heir's castle. If you take the baby, problems may arise. The girl really asked that Rudia be given to her, when suddenly the Marquis entered the house, noticing that the widow had not yet finished her work. He ordered Dylan to take his things and light the fireplace in the tower, because they were taking the child with them. Claire looked shocked, but Bolt acted as if these things were self-evident, because you can't let a child catch a cold. After some time, Claire was already sitting in the tower, warming herself by the fireplace and feeding Rudia. However, the food had already cooled down and needed to be reheated. The Marquis offered to hold the girl while Claire warmed the food. The widow really didn't want to give the child to the Lord, so she resisted and said that she would do everything herself. But the child himself reached out to the man with the word Dad. The Marquis also noted that even a child could decide what was best, and Claire was left in complete surprise. Initially, she refused because she could not imagine the Marquis with the baby in his arms, but Rudia was fine. She smiled widely at the Lord. Bolt put his finger in the child's mouth, which caused a ton of indignation from the widow, because the finger could have been dirty. The Marquis again thought about the excessive arrogance of this woman, but allowed her to behave this way today. A little later, all 3 were already lying in bed, Rudia snoring sweetly under Claire's side. She asked if the girl could stay here for a while until the boys got better. The Marquis said in a completely indifferent tone that in this case, she only needed to give herself to him as before. Claire tried to say that there was a small child here, but Bolt replied that the child was too young to understand anything, or he would have to refuse the request. He whispered in her ear and even bit her, offering to move the whole family to the castle, or to live in the castle herself too. She said that the tower was enough for her, and Bolt pressed closer to the girl, reminding her that it was better for her to use what he gave. She should be content with every single opportunity. There is a memory that Claire will not let go of, cold frost when you freeze to the bones, and death seems to be knocking on the door. But the little girl had to deal with it. Whispering voices kept asking if the girl was crazy, that she was stubborn like her mother, a vicious girl. Claire could only do whatever they wanted despite all the talk. Like a friend, she felt warm and realized that she had never had this dream before. The girl woke up in tears and realized that she had not cried for a very long time, but she was completely alone on the bed. Claire turned the whole bed over in horror and then quickly went down the stairs and saw the Marquis and Dylan. Bolt was amazed how such a small child could eat so much, and then he saw Claire. She stood silently, trying to realize that all this was happening in reality. The girl could not understand what happened to Bolt Morenheitz while she was having her 7th dream. It seemed that the child had finally had his fill. Dylan took his leave and said that he would bring the remaining things tomorrow. The night left, and Claire turned to the Marquis with a request to take Rudia. The Marquis said that this was not necessary and suggested that we go upstairs, and that today they would bring a new bed, since a smaller bed was needed. And Claire needs to keep her ears open, but the girl still couldn't get over the fact that Bolt ordered a bed especially for the baby. He kissed the widow's hand and said that now she would not have to curl up to sleep with the girl. Claire still couldn't believe what was happening. It seems that the world turned upside down while she was sleeping, and Rudia just fell to this man. 3 days later, Dylan reported that Finn and Luke were doing much better. So tomorrow morning he is going to take Rudia back home. The Marquis asked if Claire was really so upset that she would have to part with the baby if she really loved children so much. The girl said that this is her family, and she is not sure that she always loved children. Bolt asked how Claire would feel about her children, and she replied that she had struggled with a bad fever when she was little, lived in the cold all the time, and was often sick, so it was hardly worth thinking about having children with her. The Marquis considered this nonsense, but Claire said quite seriously that the doctor had warned that it would be difficult for her to get pregnant. In other words, she will not be able to become a mother. Rudia frolicked in the Marquis's arms, pulled his hair and laughed. Bolt noticed that she had a lot of stamina, just like the captain, but now it was time to calm down. He remembered Claire's words recently. She said that he didn't seem to care, but when she told her aunt about the problems of pregnancy, she cried incessantly. The Marquis replied that with or without a child, the widow still belonged to him. She was so calm, as if she had never wanted to try to become a mother in her life, as if she had not dreamed of building her own family. Claire curled up again and snorted in her sleep. This infuriated the Marquis. Her mother was tortured by some noble brat before her death. They were tormented by hunger, which is why she is so weak. In addition, she had to accept the status of a widow, single-handedly raising 3 children who were not even her own, and she also gave herself to a man of noble blood whom she was supposed to despise. It's so annoying, and he's never understood why she always sleeps in the fetal position. Then the baby in her mother's arms screamed, and the Marquis asked her to be quiet. No matter how hard Rudia tries, her aunt still belongs to Bolt. Birds were singing outside, workers were bustling about, and 2 men were walking along the red carpet of the corridor. Viscount Baron was in a great mood. A week had passed since he arrived in Volador. All because of the idiot Marquis, the Viscount failed his mission, which was to deliver an incredibly important message from the Archduke. But today, everything will be different. Now a baron with military supplies, ideal for a military leader. Claire passed by, Jake silently bowed to her, and the Viscount could not believe how this was possible. He had never seen eyes of such a pure blue hue. The Archduke would definitely not be able to resist such beauty. Yes, the hair color is a little inappropriate, but the eyes should be enough. Such a treasure is hidden in the mountains, so the Baron decided to ask the butler a question about this woman. Baron Keenitz very coldly and even a little ominously warned the Viscount that not a single soul in Volador would dare to touch what belonged to the Marquis. Otherwise, during his lifetime he will go through as many circles of hell as he would not have to go through even if he died. The sun was setting. The Marquis stood on the roof of the tower and admired the sky. All his thoughts were occupied with her. It seems Claire would like this color. Most likely she will rise too, because she will want to be closer to this sky as much as possible. Bolt even grinned at how predictable she was. She was already cold. But she can't resist looking at such a small thing as the beautifully colored sky. But the sight of Claire running towards him gives the Marquis great pleasure. So let him run. Don't stop and run. And in a matter of minutes, the girl found herself at the top of the tower. Bolt thought that this was even absurd, and then he walked closer to her. She has a man who is ready to lie at her feet, but she continues to be stubborn and cannot even give him her smile. But still, when the Marquis sees Claire, looks into her eyes, all disappointment drowns in these deep blue waters. Bolt ran his finger over the girl's lips and gently touched them with his lips. After a while, they were already lying in the same bed. Claire shared that she did not expect to see the Marquis today. She saw the carriages that arrived from Langtao. They were much larger than the ones she saw last time. Especially the last one, so flashy and extravagant, Claire thought there might be a Lady Brody inside. Bolt kissed the girl on the top of her head and said that he didn't care at all. And Claire thought that he was the only person in the world who didn't care about the Archduke's gifts. She stood up and asked if the gentleman wanted to become the Archduke's son-in-law. He grinned and replied that of course not. Also, if Count Schwyven heard this now, he would foam at the mouth. Claire looked away and said that perhaps Lady Brody didn't look like her father. Of course, the widow still doesn't like her, but she was definitely elegant and accommodating. Bolt smiled and leaned closer to Claire, remembering that blue really suited her. He leaned on the girl again, but she said she couldn't do it anymore today. Suddenly, Bolt's face changed and froze, his gaze directed towards the door. Claire jumped up, not understanding what was happening outside, but the Marquis asked her to stay in place, and he himself took the sword. He promised the girl that if she was a good girl, he would give her something that would fit even better than that dress. There was a fierce battle on the street. The man in the cloak noticed that he had not fought for a long time, so he could not control his strength. Two Teutonic knights could not cope with some stranger and were depressed, but at that moment the Marquis arrived to the rescue. He immediately realized that in front of him was a mercenary who used combat techniques never seen before by the Knights of the Order. Bolt was determined. He took out his sword and began to fight with the stranger. The Marquis saw that the mercenary was not trying to kill him, but there was enormous power hidden in the enemy's sword. Bolt tried to figure out who this man was, but then a boot flew at the attacker. Calling the cloaked man a bastard, an enraged Claire appeared on the battlefield. She rushed at Endine with curses, but Bolt held her back by force. A few minutes ago, Claire was thinking why the Marquis took the sword with him. Earlier, he had put it away and didn't even want to look at it. She got out of bed because she just wanted to look outside out of curiosity. The girl went to the window and recognized the young man at first sight. He was as big as the Marquis and wielded a sword with an irritatingly arrogant manner. Endine raised his hands and apologized. Bolt threatened to cut out his tongue. Claire rushed straight to her brother and slapped him hard, continuing to scream curses. He tried to justify himself, explaining that he was exiled because he wanted to help his beloved sister, like a real older brother, but he received no thanks. Claire screamed that she too remained in exile and could not even organize a decent funeral for Jenna, but Bolt again hugged the girl to himself. The Marquis ordered the mercenary to be thrown into prison and killed if he resisted, and after a while, he and Claire were again sitting in the tower. The girl sat on the Lord's lap and asked to be left alone, as she felt uncomfortable. He didn't want to let her go. Claire was still shaking, so he held her tighter. She explained that she was still furious. Until recently, she lived in cold and hunger, and everything was fine. Marquis said he doesn't know what the girl went through, but he won't let her go through it again while he's around. Bolt asked to explain why the brother and sister diverged, and she explained that some time ago she worked on the pier, was responsible for installing fishing nets, and a nobleman noticed her there. When Endine saw the nobleman preparing to take Claire with him, he cut off his hand, but it was later revealed that the man was a knight of Langtao Castle. Therefore, the brother and sister had to go on the run, but Endine, who started the whole mess, abruptly changed the plan. He said that he would go to the ship alone, explaining that it would be too noticeable if they ran away together. This cowardly bastard walked away silently, while Jenna, the mother of his children, called for him until her last breath. The Marquis noted for himself that Endine did not seem cowardly to him, but still asked what he needed to do with this man. She indifferently said that she could kill her brother since she didn't want to see his pitiful face. Moreover, she was even ready to do it herself if the Lord gave her the sword Ascaron. Bolt grinned and said that he would discuss this later, but now he turned the girl over onto her back. She disobeyed the order, so now Claire will face punishment. And since the widow has stopped obeying her master, there is no need to expect any concessions. In the dungeon, Endin was tossing and turning on the hay, but his loneliness was broken by the general of the order, who came to punish him for offending the honor of his master. The young man noted that it was this gentleman who swung his sword at him in the first meeting, and now he only came to visit his sister. Julian explained that in this case, you need to request an audience and not burst in a thief's mask, after which the general twisted Endin's hand. The Knight of the Order reasoned that the attacker really was not aiming at the head, but at the shoulder, which means he did not want to cause harm. Analyzing the words of the Marquise and the behavior of Endine, Julian decided to invite the mercenary with him somewhere, although he could not trust this man. The young man, by the way, was aware of the positions of the knights, so he indicated that he was aware that the general of the order was named Julian Crom. Julian himself noted that despite the external similarity between brother and sister, Endine emanates a completely different aura, which can only be read by another swordsman. Sometime later, the general of the order and the mercenary stood in front of the Marquis of Morinheights. At the moment of yesterday's meeting, Endine felt something unusually remarkable in the lord. At this time, Bolt turned to the mercenary, asking how he knew that his sister was in the tower. Endine explained that it was a known rumor that the great Lord Margrave imprisoned a widow in his tower, and there weren't many women with blue eyes and 3 children. And even without complete certainty that it was really his sister in the tower, Endine was at least confident in his abilities. The mercenary did not really like this interrogation. The Marquis smiled, but his gaze penetrated straight into the soul. Now it's clear why Bolt is called the Red Lion, and even with all his abilities, Endine would have suffered more yesterday if not for his sister. Bolt took his sword out of its sheath and raised it near the mercenary's neck, saying that his sister had ordered him to be killed. A nervous chuckle escaped Endine's lips. He was sure that this was all a joke, but the Marquis said that Claire even wanted to do it herself. Bolt put the sword back and said that perhaps he would give her such a chance, after which Endine was captured. The Lord gave orders to Crom to tell the Teutonic Knights to keep an eye on this man. They need to be patient and wait for Claire to improve her sword skills enough. Julian was surprised that the Marquis was going to teach the girl himself. The general noted that it would be difficult for a student to train with an overly educated teacher, but Bolt replied that, of course, he would not teach his woman the same way he taught men. The phrase about his woman made Endine think, he is the crazy one who constantly forgets his place. Claire is like the wind, like ocean water that never stops. Never in her life has she been on his side. Viscount Baron caught up with Baron Kienitz in the corridor, who, out of politeness, asked how the guest was doing. A lot of time has passed since the day when the Viscount set his sights on Claire, and it seems that the butler did everything to avoid running into the Baron again. The Viscount had long ago requested an audience with the Marquise, so he was very angry. Besides, the Baron needs to return home before the cold weather sets in. The Viscount had no intention of leaving until he saw the Marquise, and was determined to meet today. Kienitz tried to stop the guest, because right now the Marquis is with a woman. But in general, the Viscount Baron himself could notice this now, because right on the street, long grey hair was fluttering in the wind. The Baron held the girl close to him, and Kienitz remarked that it would be better for the Viscount Baron to schedule an audience for another day. It all started when Claire came to the training ground on Bolt's orders. The Marquis gave her a wooden sword and asked her to try to swing it. The girl confidently waved her wooden weapon. Bolt grinned and asked if she had previously trained in fencing. Claire explained that she studied with her grandfather, and her brother also taught her, but only from time to time, and even if she did not dare to behead her teacher, the ability to handle a sword could be useful in the future. Bolt was inspired and promised to train the girl properly. He started from the place where the heart is. He should aim there if there is a chance. If you are determined to take someone's life, you need to aim here, especially if your opponent has insulted her. Claire took aim, Bolt praised her, and then pulled her towards him. Their faces were very close to each other. The Marquis grinned. It was this scene that Viscount Baron and Baron Kienitz saw. Later, Count Schwaven sat over a cup of tea with Claire and asked how the lesson with the Marquis went. The girl replied that everything was fine. Her mood had even improved now. Claire was surprised by this question because the Count was unhappy with this sudden activity. Schwaven looked thoughtfully into his cup of tea and asked if the widow would like to become his adopted daughter. It seemed to Claire that they had finished talking about her as the mistress of the house and the mistress of the Marquis. The Count explained that this was a different question, but the girl suggested that there were many charming ladies in the Empire who would clearly be better suited for the role of the daughter of Count Schwaven. The man said that he was not looking for a daughter who would be nothing more than a girl to satisfy the needs of the Marquis in bed. He wants Claire to live her life and realize her full potential. In the evening, a blue-eyed guest visited Aunt Gelda's house. The boys looked at him in surprise. The aunt scolded as usual, pushing the man home and saying that if his body fell to pieces, he would at least stop getting into endless troubles. It seems that even the children did not disdain to be near their father. Auntie had already begun to list the curse words again, when she was suddenly stopped by Claire, who had returned, because children at that age absorb all the words. Now the girl asked her brother why he came here. The man answered that the old man made him promise that he would bring Claire back. The grandfather is getting older and older every day, so he worries about his granddaughter. Endine and the pirates were sent to Puisin because the old man had become too impatient, and they did not cause any serious damage. The man began to swear that his sister got into trouble and became the Marquise's woman, but Aunt Gelda quickly came to the defense of her niece. Claire began to reassure her aunt, reminding her that without her help, she would have immediately died there on the island. Endine decided to clarify whether the girl really came here not of her own free will, but because the bastard Marquis forced her to go with him. She protested, saying that everything was wrong, but her brother approached Claire and called her with him. On the street, Endine swore that a woman could not decide and achieve something. He gave money and simply asked to wait out the winter, but Claire explained that this was not enough to save the children. The brother was outraged that in this case, she decided to go straight into the arms of this scoundrel. He grabbed his sister's hand and shouted why she even cared about his children, why she fed them and protected them, because she had always been so cold towards him. Claire did not like this tone. She broke out and reminded that she did not need Endine as a man. He should only be her brother and nothing more, and the girl does not want to repeat this twice. If he doesn't like something, he can leave. If he did it once, then the second time it will be even easier. Moreover, Claire believes that one of the reasons why Endine ran away was because Jenna was obsessed with him, but his brother responded that he was trying to love and protect her. Claire turned around and said seriously that they both knew the truth. He only accepted Jenna's love while his sister rejected him. Endine was horrified. He asked why his sister continued to take care of his children. He could ignore them. She should have run away, because how heavy a girl's burden would have to be for her to stop being so cruel. Endine still tried to say that he would take the girl away from here, but she turned around and replied that he only needed to be near his aunt and help her. Claire kept wondering why she didn't run away, and also did everything with her own hands to make herself look so stupid. Does Endine think she had a choice? Does he think he has the right to care for her? Moreover, he also thinks that she won't be able to do anything being a woman. How stupid. If Endine continues to resist or interfere, Claire will kill him, and if she returns, it will be of her own free will. The Count's words about self-realization and potential were spinning in my head. He then offered to take a higher position so that Claire did not need anyone's help. It all started when, under the skies that connect the beginning and the end, two people obsessed with love promised each other to stay together forever. They were truly a wonderful couple and should not have been separated even on their deathbed. The Marquis of Morinheights 2 generations ago, Newburgh Morinheights, aka Bolt's grandfather, asked if this was a wonderful story. Baby Bolt himself sat with a bored look and decided to clarify whether there really would be a history lesson today. Grandfather pointed a book at the boy and said that this was also very important for the princess, who would soon arrive in Geneva. Newburgh hoped for this marriage of convenience, despite the fact that the lady was still too young to ascend to the throne. However, she is a little older, but Morinheight Senior's next sentence was interrupted by a knock on the door. The current Marquis, Martel Morinheights, Bolt's father, entered. He wanted to ask his father to come out for a moment. Bolt realized that he needed to leave the room, so he took his leave, but out of the corner of his ear, he heard his father talking about a maid whose whereabouts were unknown. The boy thought about the princess, whose parents died after her birth. His grandfather was obliged to protect her. He lived his life, keeping the memory of Emperor Ringen. Before Ringen died, leaving only Empress Bertha and his newborn daughter, he left a request. The emperor asked his old friend to defend the princess on behalf of the Morinheighters. Therefore, Bolt often thought about the princess, although he had not even seen her portrait. An unfortunate princess who became an orphan immediately after birth. They say she has the same red hair as the empress and the brightest blue eyes in the palace. But Bolt didn't want to dwell on it, because it was just a marriage of convenience. There were many things beyond his understanding, such as the concern of a conquering man only for his daughter, or the value of a princess, although in fact she was useless. Then the boy turned 13 years old. An assassin entered the heir's tower on the day when his engagement to the princess was officially announced. The father was furious. If Bolt was going to kill the attacker from the very beginning, then why was he so cruel? The boy replied that he was wondering how much pain it would take to get the truth out of someone who gets paid to kill. The emperor's attempts to avoid various problems in the future led to the fact that all failures began to be correlated with the work of Svergen, who harbored a grudge against the empire. And the next year, Princess Skadia drowned in the Jurassic Sea. No one began to help her, because she had already gone so deep into the dark abyss. It seems that Emperor Ringen's wish never came true. No one in the castle said these words out loud, but everyone had the same thoughts on their minds. If Bolt Morinheights had died, the princess might have survived. One can imagine the look on his father's face that day. An adult Marquis was walking along the wall, bleeding. The Count ran after him, begging the master to stop because he could not move. The wound was very severe. Bolt needed to remain quiet. But he entered Claire's office, where she was receiving nobles and documents. She was surprised by the sight of the bloody body and sent the people away. Today, the Marquis is still the master of Geneva, so he can do whatever he wants. The nobles left the office whispering. Claire and Bolt looked at each other. He was touched by the words about today. He approached the girl, reminding her that she should not hesitate to kill her prey. Claire smiled and replied that she would not pursue an animal that was not going to escape anyway. Bolt raised his tone and reminded that the widow was always his only. From the very beginning, she belonged to Bolt Moran Heights. Claire asked him not to move abruptly because he could die. This really amazed the Marquis. Why did she even care about his life if tomorrow she could cease to belong to him? He didn't want to lose Claire even more than he didn't want to die, so creaks and groans could be heard among the bloody papers. The girl was trembling. She was so weak that she couldn't even push the lord away. She was so fragile that it would be easy to twist her thin neck. First of all, Bolt thought about killing her. Before this woman tore him to shreds, he only thought about how to become her first and last man. But he seems to have now realized one important thing. Bolt decided that he would rather die than tear a single hair off the head of this arrogant woman. He was dying in her arms, promising to become her nightmare. Claire recalled that Undine was always a fearless child. He didn't even know how old he was or where his parents were. He went sailing until an elderly man picked him up. The elderly man turned out to be a pirate captain and did not notice that the child had already grown up, was talented and was developing quickly. He was predicted to become a future captain when he turned 10. He had nothing to fear except a little girl. The boy was indignant at how such a small mouse could talk to him like that. Claire said that you can only become successful if you watch your language. It was not worth saying that Aunt Gelda lost her lover because of her bad character. Thus, the brother and sister were not related by blood, and Undine again got into trouble. Julian found the man in the corridor and hurried to take him into the room. At this time, Claire was snoring in the tower on the Marquis's shoulder. There was not a trace of concern on her face. She pressed herself against Bolt to keep warm. The Marquis kept thinking that Claire and Undine were not related, but since he did not ask, there was no lie in it. Who would have guessed who this ordinary woman would be fooling him like that? If she's so obsessed with these kids who aren't even their mother, then another reason could be another connection. Bolt got out of bed and decisively headed towards the exit. Dylan stood at the door and asked if the gentleman would stay here for the night. The Lord ordered this woman's aunt to be thrown into prison. After some time, Gelda found herself behind bars, trying to find out the reason for her imprisonment. She couldn't understand what could have happened so suddenly, other than the tricks of that damn boy. The Marquis entered. Goosebumps ran through the woman's body. What had Undine done? Gelda bowed at the master's feet, asking why he wanted to see her. Bolt brought her here so that the woman could answer one question for him. The Marquis was interested in why they were pretending to be family if they were not related by blood, but Gelda answered that Claire was the daughter of a woman who was a sister to her. Bolt said in a calm tone as the woman babbled that he hated slow-witted people. Gelda said she was a close friend of Claire's mother, and her father took her in when she lost her parents at a young age. So they grew up like sisters, and Claire's mother was the most beautiful woman in the whole wide world. She was also Gelda's closest friend. They spent every second together. Even when she promised to give herself to a man, her aunt remained by her side and wished her happiness. But at that moment, the red-haired woman invited Gelda to move in with her. It seemed that her father would be more comfortable this way because he cared for them equally. After the death of Claire's mother, the bastards imprisoned the girl. They locked her in that place without the ability to even light a fire that cold winter. Bolt asked what kind of relationship they had with this grey-haired man. Undine is a boy who was sheltered by Gelda's father, and her aunt herself had to leave the house to find a doctor since Claire was seriously ill. They could easily have died while crossing the storm if not for Undine. Claire was responsible for 3 children and a brother sitting on her neck, so she was also seriously ill. The Marquis is still not completely convinced of his hypothesis about the unusual relationship between brother and sister, so he decided to ask one more question. Bolt wondered if Claire really couldn't have children. Gelda said that the girl was indeed diagnosed with infertility. This was due to medications that were intended to increase her naturally low body temperature. Leaving, Bolt said that he would send Greg to Gelda. He needed to describe everything to him in detail. The aunt was left alone in the hay behind bars, surprised that this was the end of the conversation. Bolt ordered to go to Greg at dawn and instruct him to find medicine for low body temperature. The next day, a bunch of people with boxes crowded near the tower. Claire didn't understand anything, but Jake explained that these were all gifts to her from the Marquis. The girl thought that since Geneva was more of a fortified fortress, such extravagant things must have been brought from Langthu. Keenitz explained that the Archduke's gifts were kept in a warehouse, and if any of the Teutonic knights had noticed them, they would have caused a scene. All because the Teutons harbored a grudge against the Archduke because of the previous commander. The conversation between Claire and Jake was interrupted by the appearance of the Marquis Morenheitz. He immediately asked if his orders had arrived. Jake said that they had just finished checking them. However, there are a lot of things, so it will take some time, so the Marquis suggested that Claire take a walk. The two of them rode horseback across the snowy plains. Claire was tense. She had no idea how difficult it was to lead a horse, and besides, the horse moved so fast. Bolt held the girl by the waist and told her to keep her back straight. She needed to appear arrogant, since Bouquet liked such riders. Claire doubted the animal's ability to recognize such things, and he immediately neighed. The lady had to apologize. The Marquis lifted the girl's chin and said that she should also look around. Doesn't she want to admire the views? Majestic mountains really rose in front of them, but the gorgeous view was spoiled by thoughts of interrogating Aunt Gelda. The Marquis talked about people who cross the mountains in winter so as not to make a big circle, otherwise they would have to get stuck in the winter forest and be eaten by wild animals. Claire asked the Lord if he himself was lost in that forest. Bolt replied in a languid voice that it was the case, and besides, perhaps he was lost now. The Marquis approached Claire as close as possible and kissed her deeply. It never stopped snowing here, so the decision was made to return home before they got stuck in the snowdrifts. Bolt slowed his horse. Claire closed her eyes in fear, but Bolt convincingly asked her not to squint. The girl opened her eyes and saw stunningly beautiful snow-capped mountains. It was a real Altus. Claire felt as if it had all swallowed her up, but she wasn't afraid, because wherever she was, she felt his presence and warmth. After a while, they were already basking in a warm bath. Bolt was interested in what she was talking about with Jake. Claire decided to ask about the grievance of the Teutonic Knights. The Marquis explained that it was the Archduke who killed the previous commander of the Teutonic Knights. Of course, the imperial family denies this, but who will believe them? And all because the Teutons do not recognize the legitimacy of the current imperial family. Since the emperor made his mother empress, the Teutons refused to worship them. So the emperor showed what could happen in case of disobedience. How stupid! Power and strength are something that must be earned. They are not served on a silver platter. They so craved the adoration of the people, but all their attempts amounted to the death of their reputation. Claire thought that the Teutons were unquestioningly loyal to the imperial family, but in reality, they were loyal to whoever could defeat their captain. The first emperor Ringen emerged victorious, so the Teutons unquestioningly became part of the imperial knights. Bolt was surprised at the woman's obedience, and also now realized that she corresponded to the Teutonic warrior spirit and demanding nature. And the Teutons would be loyal only to the direct heirs of the imperial family. Thus, if they disobeyed the ruler, it meant that he was illegitimate. Their refusal hurt the pride of the imperial family, so the commander of the order was killed, and this conversation had already taken longer than Bolt expected. But Claire did not let up and asked what would happen to the Teutons if a direct heir to the ruling family now appeared. Bolt, tired of the questions, said that it was time to pay for today's lesson. Moans were heard in the room, active movements splashed the water in the bath, but the Marquis refused to stop. He was going to take Claire again and again. She would always be his. It seemed to the girl that she would immediately melt from this heat. Her whole body was trembling. Bolt held Claire close, whispering that she was his woman. But the girl refused to live like this. She was only going to laugh at the Marquis, but for some reason she feels as if her heart was broken. To distract herself from strange thoughts, Claire kissed Bolt passionately. The next day, the girl was faced with a large amount of accumulated work. The Count brought more papers, since during the 2 days of the clerk's absence no one was working on these documents. Claire was outraged because she was absent against her will. She didn't even get to sleep, but Schweiven didn't care. The girl decided to take the opportunity and ask about the Teutons. What would happen to the Marquis if a direct heir to the ruling family now appeared? Claire's curiosity bordered on impudence, but Schweiven replied that despite the Marquis's victory over Crom, their priority would always be the imperial family. The girl now understood why the commander was now so loyal to Bolt, all because of his victory in the battle. Claire did not let up and decided to find out what benefit the Morenheites were getting with the support of the Teutons. The Count explained that Geneva's warriors could not have held out against the Teutons in battle. At this time, Julian Crom entered the office, asking for forgiveness for the intrusion. He came to say that the Marquis was calling Claire to him. The Count had already begun to be indignant, but the knight said that the Lord was calling the two of them. Schweiven was surprised, but apparently this is connected with the return of his son. All three came to the Marquis's office, where Bolt and Max, who had returned from an important mission, were already waiting for them. Claire moved behind the table with the documents, and Max tried to squeeze out at least a word of gratitude from his father, handing him a roll of parchment. Blood on paper angered the Count with such a disrespectful attitude towards the document, so he immediately asked Claire to document it. But most of all, Claire was amazed by the Marquis and could not believe that he was satisfying all requests immediately after the Count's request. Bolt sat silently and watched the girl at work while father and son quarreled. Schwijven said that this contract is very important, so he needs a copy, so Claire should focus on the conversation. The Lord asked Max how the negotiations went. The captain even had to use his fists. Claire took note of everything Max said, although she doubted whether it was appropriate for her to do this work. Bolt mentioned that there is one secret place that the Imperial family does not know about. This is a mine, which the Marquis hides from prying eyes in every possible way for a long time. Claire, feeling like she was just a passing stage, didn't understand why she should have such information. Bolt at this time was deciding who could be sent as a new delegation. The Count spoke out against the choice of knights because they do not have enough experience in naval wars, and Max was annoyed because this is the only order that detained 10 pirate ships on one boat. This dispute reached a dead end, so the Marquis took it upon himself to choose the man he was willing to send. The Marquis turned to Julian with a question about the same one, and it seems that the captain guessed that he was talking about the brother of that woman. In a cold tone, Bolt ordered him to be sent to the training room to see what Endine could do. A lot of people gathered to watch the sparring with the Marquis. They did not believe that the spy would have even one chance. Bolt, in his armor, walked calmly down the castle corridor. Claire called out to him, reminding him that Endine, her brother, was just a sailor. He could not meet the Marquis in a fair fight. This did not bother the Lord at all. He wanted to see everything in practice, but the girl insisted that sending her brother to Blanche was also pointless. The Marquis could not resist, turned towards the widow and asked if she really thought that he would allow this bastard to stay next to her. Claire guessed that Bolt was concerned about the nature of her relationship with Endine. Was he really that obsessed? The Marquis stroked the girl's cheek and asked her to behave, otherwise he would behead her brother. Claire should also wait for Bolt to receive a gift intended only for her. Endine was already waiting on the street for the Marquis, who considered the Lord nothing more than a narrow-minded idiot. He believed that all nobles, even margraves, are the same. Not a single man would allow someone else to rub around his lady. Bolt was fully armed. He pulled out his legendary sword, shining in the sun. Claire, standing in the crowd, lowered her beautiful blue eyes. Endine's blood boiled when he thought about how his sister spent her nights with the Marquis. The crowd screamed. They had absolutely no faith in the sailor's abilities. The man frowned and rushed into battle. A fierce battle was taking place in the arena, and the clanging of metal could be heard in the air. Endine expected to break all of Bolt's limbs, from the head lying on her shoulder to the fingers touching her body. He was going to break the Marquise with everything he touched Claire with. She was always a cold girl that he himself did not dare to approach. Meanwhile, Endine's attacks and smooth movements were noticed by the crowd. But still, Bolt professionally blocked all the attacks and moved very well, as if he was playing with his opponent. However, suddenly the grin left the Marquis's face. He suddenly rushed at Endine. His movements changed. The grey-haired man decided to provoke his opponent and said that he actually stole Claire's first kiss. This fight ended in Endine's defeat. Max, meanwhile, told Julian that he did not see any similarities between brother and sister. He also noticed that the Marquis was exhausting his opponent very much. Most likely the gentleman was not himself right now. It got dark outside. Bolt walked, sweating, and wondered if he should have killed that man. On the other hand, he can't believe that he was enraged by such a provocation. He really wanted to behead the scoundrel, open his stomach, so as not to feel so lousy. Jake met the gentleman, asking a million questions, but the Marquis was only concerned about Claire's whereabouts. Keenitz reported that she was most likely with the Count, and Bolt gave the order to bring the girl to him and get rid of that man. The Marquis only thought that this woman would belong to him forever. She will always wear his favorite color, look the way he wants, and live where he wants. Under the cover of darkness, Claire stood near the door to the study and thought that the Marquis had visited her in the tower last night. But this was the first time she had been called in this way. She was interested in what happened to Endine. She was not able to watch it to the end, but she heard that the Marquis won. The door creaked. Bolt went out into the corridor and announced that Claire's brother was going to Blanche. The girl reacted calmly, and the Marquis was surprised that before she had resisted, made arguments, and now her strategy had changed. He plucked up courage and asked if the reason this woman had unconditional love for her children was because they were the children of the man she was in love with. Is it possible that Claire perceives them as her own in the hope that one day he would return to her? Even icy water and cold wind could not cool Bolt's burning heart. There is no doubt that she belongs to him. She is so obedient, but the Marquis cannot take even a piece from her. Claire was silent, and Bolt was ready to pounce on her and break her thin neck, but she suddenly said that Endine saved her life. The girl felt the coldness emanating from the Marquis. For some time now, she had vaguely noticed how much this man cared about her. But today she began to realize that he cared about her more than she could have imagined. Claire explained that Endine saved her from drowning in the Jurassic Sea twice, so she was simply paying back the debt. But if there were no encumbrances, she would have strangled him with her bare hands. This bastard ruined her life. Claire didn't understand what she was feeling right now. She didn't know if she wanted to die or continue to live, or run away from everyone and everywhere. Bolt put his hand on the girl's fragile shoulder, and then placed a beautiful jewelry around her neck. Many precious stones sparkled even in the dark. He hugged her from behind and said that she would not dare even look at her parents without his permission. The Marquis approached Claire's face and said that she must remain near him. A wooden bed creaked in Bolt's room, and conversations about blue eyes plunged the girl into memories of how these words were spoken by all the men who saw her. She wondered if blue eyes really had some kind of magical power. Bolt made a sudden movement. He hoped that Claire was not thinking about something else right now. She looked at this man and realized that there was something in common between him and that idiot. Infantile arrogance and a sense of responsibility for her have grown into obsession, but he does not realize this because he is gradually losing himself. He had tried many times to get rid of his obsession, to fall in love with someone else, but in the end, this bastard would send them all to hell. Even Marquis Bolt Morinhites, the strongest man in the Empire, still, through his own stupidity, leads to self-destruction. However, it seems that now he has become different. The Lion of the Empire kisses her so reverently, he is so kind to her, and this greatly frightens Claire. In a fit of passion, the heated Bolt whispered that he would do anything for her. Unlike the widow, who has nothing behind her, the Marquis is so obsessed with the need to protect her, and yet he behaves this way without hesitating for a second. Besides, he doesn't even know what Claire really wants. She embarrassedly asked to take her so that she could not think about anything else. Bolt smiled and began to satisfy the girl's request. New scratches appeared on his back, and the room was filled with loud moans. The Marquis kissed the girl on the forehead, hugged her tightly, and said that he wanted her to desire only him. And then he will throw the world at her feet, and not just jewelry and trinkets. At Langtao Castle they discussed the Marquis's mistress, a widow with 3 children. The Viscount told the Archduke that this woman looked beautiful, like a young maiden. More importantly, the Marquis seems to have a serious relationship with her. She often visits the castle, so we can assume that she is quite an influential figure there. It is especially interesting how the servants treat the girl. The special attitude of Baron Kienitz suggests that this widow is an important guest. The Viscount insisted that since this woman had already given birth to 3 children, it would also be easy for her to give birth to another to the Marchioness. At this rate, he could get ahead of the Archduke, but Edwin didn't like being nervous about some petty mistress. After all, she was just a commoner, but the Viscount was worried that the Marquis had absolutely no plans to marry Lady Brodie. At the last meeting, the Lord said that he did not think that he would visit Puissant again. Besides, beyond the Altus Mountains lives the Svergen Marquis Mikent, who has only 1 daughter. Svergen would be ready to give up his only princess. If his relationship with the Marquis of Morinhites is at stake, they would be happy to give him anything to join forces. Now any person in the Empire, hearing about the House of Morinhites, will think of Bolt Morinhites. He began with the rank of a brave warrior and a member of the Assembly of Margraves. But now he is considered a brilliant marquis who doomed his predecessors to oblivion, and besides this, he is known as a hero who defended the Empire. The Archduke was furious. He couldn't let this bastard ruin the purity of his blood. Ruler Martin Xavier. He accumulated so much wealth because he came from Edwin's mother's side of the family. The Archduke believes it was the right decision to get rid of this family, but still, they were ideal scapegoats responsible for the dirty work. Edwin thought about how his blood relatives could be useful. From now on, it becomes difficult to think ahead. Here the Archduke drew attention to the Viscount Baron, who was still sitting in the office. Edwin yelled at the guest and ordered him to go find out what the bastard Bolt was doing and do everything to get him to marry Lady Brodie. It was necessary to arrange a wedding at all costs, because if he brought Bolt and Brodie together and they gave the world a child, then that would solve everything. The Archduke's hysterical laughter was heard in the office as he imagined his dream in detail. Claire was working diligently on the papers at this time, tracing each letter with a pen. The Count reported that the delegation would leave for Blanche today, and he was interested in whether the girl would go to say goodbye. Schwijven noted that this trip was quite dangerous. Maybe it was worth blessing his brother before leaving. Claire answered indifferently, but noticed to herself that the Count was surprisingly sentimental. She explained that she was initially against this plan, but the Marquis dispelled all her doubts, and besides, Endin himself decided everything. Over the past month he has constantly visited the house. He acted so out of character, and it wasn't just that Endin himself had changed. He took on the role of a father more often, and the story of his family spread throughout the castle. Some were imbued with sympathy, and some were angry. One by one, people began to open up to Claire and began to treat her differently. Lady Claire began to address her more often, but there was also a person who did not change. The Count noted the girl's composure towards her own family, but this made him happy because she would devote more time to work. Schwijven said goodbye and left the office. The girl was glad to finally sit in silence. She thought that the children would be bored after Endin left, so she should visit them. However, she was distracted from these thoughts by footsteps. At that moment, the Marquis entered the office. He took the girl by the hand and led her along, despite the fact that she still had a lot of things to do. Bolt led Claire outside, where the horse was already waiting for them. The Marquis also threw a fur coat over the girl's shoulders and said that she had to hurry because she needed to return before dusk. Claire was surprised if they were going outside again. Bolt smiled and said that this time everything would be a little different. He promised that this time he would allow the girl to do whatever she wanted with him. They ended up going skiing, with Claire constantly falling and Bolt reminding her to keep her feet together and fall on her side when slowing down. At this speed, she would not be able to keep up with the Marquis, but it seemed that Claire did not understand why she would need this. He remembered the expression on her face that night. It seemed that she was reliving the heaviness that she did not share. Claire sheepishly noted that Latin was much easier than snowshoeing. Bolt convinced the girl that there was no need to be afraid of steep slopes. Such insignificant things were not worth attention. He promised that he would catch her every time she slipped or fell. Claire is already so accustomed to these large, warm palms that even in her sleep she seeks his embrace. But she shouldn't get used to it, because he wants to see her as poor girl Claire, suffering because of the failures of the past. But if she refuses such a life, then I am sure the Marquis will certainly become her enemy. The girl stood in front of the slope and convinced herself that she was not afraid of heights. Screaming, she rushed down, lost her balance, but was caught by the Marquis as he had promised. When he smiles like that, he looks like an ordinary man, any other. Without hundreds of titles, he would shine as brightly as he does now. The girl's restless heart beats so fast that she slips and falls at the sight of the Lord, and the heat engulfing her body is capable of melting the snow. They lay in the snow, kissed and smiled at each other. The warmest winter Claire has experienced is right now, and spring is coming. But still, despite the Marquis's initial words, she doubted that she would ever leave this place. Later, the Count and Claire were sitting at work. The delegation had already arrived in Blanche. They condemned the mines, but Max was clearly more worried about the fact that the Duke of Weimar was commissioning a new portrait for his daughter, apparently a marriage proposal. The captain continued to be indignant and argue with his father, so the Marquis was forced to drown him out. Everyone in Geneva knows how much Bolt values his woman, but Max didn't know how Claire herself would feel about this. At this time, there was a knock on the office and Baron Kinitz entered with a message from Puisine. The Marquis assumed that the Archduke would not sit idly by. Max was sure that they had already heard about the delegation. Bolt began to read the message. The captain of the order was eager to find out what it was about. It turned out that the Archduke had sent someone instead of calling the Marquis. Claire looked bored at this time. She always becomes cold-blooded when such conversations begin. The Archduke's envoy will be the new captain of the guard, who will replace Xavier. The Count was horrified, Max too, and Claire was surprised that father and son came to the same time. At this time, the Marquis stood up and slammed his palm on the table. He said that he would receive this man and ordered Baron Kinitz to prepare for the arrival of the guest. Next month, Lady Brody will most likely visit Volador with the Knights of Puisan, so everyone needs to be prepared to greet her with